Hello and welcome, my friends, to another tale of internet debauchery. This is the story of Bit of Earth, an online Lord of the Rings fan group turned fake charity, infamous scam, and also cult. There's something called the Mind Hole involved. Are you excited to learn what the Mind Hole is? I know you are. But before we begin, a note on how I will be referring to the protagonist of this tale. The person that this video is about is a trans man who currently goes by the name of Andrew or Andy Blake, is probably most well known by his username fanfiction, not fanfiction, fanfiction with a TH. That's the name he used in his Harry Potter fandom era, which is a whole other video. This video is only covering Lord of the Rings antics from 2002 to 2004. I will only be using male pronouns to refer to Andy, but for the sake of telling this story, I will be using a variety of names that he has been known by. Old screenshots I'm going to show and read also use she, her pronouns to refer to Andy. At the time that all of this unfolded, Andy being trans was a huge part of like the scandal and the scam. He told all these crazy lies and manipulated all these people, and he was even secretly a woman all along. A lot of the discourse around it was very transphobic. These days I know a lot of people look back on this and are like, oh, yeah, okay, he was just trans. Like, we're still gonna respect his identity even though he's a shitty person. Whatever. But in 2004, criticizing him, the online wank, as they called it back then, very often had to do with his gender. His most vocal enemy, Janine Renee, who wrote this whole fucking book about him that I read, still insists on referring to him by his birth name and female pronouns. He's a guy named Andy Blake. He is a serial abuser and cult leader, and if you see him, run far, far away, because he is still out there on the internet. This story, however, is going to take you back 20 years ago to the year 2002. But before we get into that, I also need to tell you a little bit about this video's sponsor, Scentbird. Scentbird is a fragrance subscription service which allows you to try out new fragrances every month. It's great if you're already a fragrance aficionado, or if you're a complete beginner like I was when I first started getting Scentbird, and now I always look forward to getting them. Always look forward to getting my little goblin hands on the scents when the bird delivers them. As usual, they sent me 3 new fragrances this month. They come in these really cool bottles. As you can see, they're not like little tiny baby sample bottles. It really is a whole month's supply, so you really get to wear something and feel it out for a whole month. I got Grandmaster Rose Absolute Coffee by Mind Games. This one smells like if your grandma was really cool and goth. White Rose and Lemon by Joe Loves. This one is like for hot girls languishing in fields. I got Rosario by House of Beau. This one is my favorite. This one gets me going, because it's like kind of fresh and herbal and nice, but it's also like really cozy. And that's what's cool about Scentbird. You get to try things out, learn what you like before committing to a large and potentially expensive bottle of perfume. Use my code STRANGEONS55 for 55% off your first month with Scentbird. That way it'll be just a little over $7. And that deal is available in the US and Canada. And now, my friends, I return you to your regularly scheduled content. On January 4th, 2002, a citizen of the internet who went by the name of Victoria Bitter, often shortened to just VB, started a Yahoo group called Bit of Earth. It was a Sam Gamgee / Sean Astin, the actor who plays Sam, fan group. It was to be filled with fan art and edits, fanfiction, discussions of Sam and the Lord of the Rings books / movies. This was at the absolute height of Lord of the Rings fandom. The first movie had just been wildly successful, which had drawn a lot of people in to read the books. Now the last 2 movies were in production, and fandom was really riding this wave of hype around them. This funky thing called the internet was getting really popular with fandoms, connecting people all over the world who shared these maybe otherwise obscure interests. VB's Bit of Earth group gained a whole 7 members in its first hour online. However, VB already had much higher aspirations for this group. You see, on the very same day that he created it, he also emailed the webmaster of Sean Astin's official website, just to like let him know about Bit of Earth. I have recently started the first internet mailing list community devoted to Samwise Gamgee and Sean Astin's delightful portrayal of him in the recent New Line Cinema production, Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Our community, A Bit of Earth, is hosted at Yahoo Groups, and though we are just getting started and not yet as large as some web communities, our intention is to establish ourselves as a primary Sam Gamgee-centered fan discussion forum. Less glamorous, perhaps, than others in the Fellowship, we nonetheless agree with Sean that Sam typifies everything good and rustically noble about hobbits, and we are attempting to stimulate interest in this complex and endearing character. As fans, we are fortunate that Sean Astin has already established himself as a considerate artist who is in touch with the public with such things as the Barnes & Noble personal question and answer sessions, and indeed, this official website itself. And so, I do not feel overbold in making a request, though we understand that the promotional schedule for Lord of the Rings is probably overwhelming right now. We would like to extend to Mr. Aston an open invitation to come and visit our community at A Bit of Earth. Bit of Earth members soon began posting, getting to know each other. VB introduced himself as a 20-year-old college student from Sheffield, England. He had an Australian fiancé named Adrian. A few days after its creation, Abigail, or Abby Sharp, joined Bit of Earth. She had already been a fan of VB's fanfiction for a while, so presumably that was her segue to joining. The group was extremely female-dominated. That is, until VB decided to do a little IRL networking. He posted this story one day about how he had met this macho marine guy outside of a showing of the Fellowship of the Ring. I will read the story to you. I was curious and flirted shamelessly, managing to catch him on the way out to the parking lot. So, you really seem to like that little hobbit. He grinned ear to ear. Fuck yeah, he's the shit. Not your average action hero. No shit, that's the whole deal, you know. He's this high with a beer gut, and he's kicking some serious orc ass. I nodded. What about the end? He tucked his head and smiled like a little boy. That was cool too, you know. Loyalty. I mean, I'm in the Marines and I get that. It's awesome. That's fucking love. Totally love. We talked for a bit and he's going to buy the books. And he says he's a major internet surfer. Oddly enough, is actually fascinated by the idea of Slash. And I've got his email address. We may actually wind up with some testosterone on this list. After VB posts about this, someone is like, so how and why did you bring slash fiction into the conversation? That's the Hobbit sex, by the way. That's the gay Hobbit sex. And VB is like, well, you see. So first I was on about how Cate Blanchett isn't hot enough to play Galadriel. Bad take. And the macho guy was like, but why do you care? You're a girl. VB did identify as a girl at the time. So VB was like, well, you see, I am a bisexual. And then macho guy was like, oh, I get it. I know bisexual. I have a brother who's bisexual. And he also likes Lord of the Rings movies. And because he is also one of those bisexuals, you know, he thinks that Legolas and Aragorn should kiss. And is that weird? Or is it not weird? And VB is like, oh, you sweet summer child. Let me tell you about the internet. This macho guy's name was apparently Chris. And he did ended up joining Bit of Earth, making him one out of 65 women. And there he opened up about how much he admired the male emotions of Lord of the Rings. Intimate male friendships, just like the military. He was almost certainly, as certain as we can possibly be, 99.9% certain, that he was one of VB's sock puppets. VB was already showing some signs of some scheming, some lying, perhaps compulsively. Meanwhile, Abby was very eager to participate in the Bit of Earth community. She likely already regarded VB as somewhat of an important writer, a figure to be looked up to. In February, VB got an eye infection so bad that he could barely see or type, which resulted in some real quirky key smash posts before his fiancée started posting on his behalf. He wound up being hospitalized for the infection, and then his fiancée brought his computer to the hospital so that he could read fanfiction out loud to him, and also take dictations of VB's fanfiction. What a real one. Fucking dream man. He then continued to live blog every update to VB's health, exactly what was going on, all of the gross pussy eye infection details you could want. The bonkers thing is that VB's boyfriend was a real guy. He was not her fiancé, and according to some sources, not Australian. According to other sources, he was Australian. Unclear whether he was Australian, but the version of him online posting for VB and taking care of him at every moment was a sock puppet, just heavily based on a real guy, who may or may not have been Australian. While VB was sick, his fiancée even coordinated with another Bit of Earth member from California for him to send them the original of one of VB's drawings so that they could get it signed by Sean Astin at a fan convention, and then of course have it mailed back to VB as this amazing surprise. And while they were there, the California-based BOE member also handed Sean Astin a business card for Bit of Earth that they had specially made to give to him. Someone pointed out, hey, is it maybe a little bit strange or crossing a boundary to bring this community to the attention of Sean Astin when it is filled with raunchy gay fanfiction about his character? VB responds, no, because this is respectful slash fiction. Sam Frodo shippers are like so respectful because they're invested in the emotions behind their relationship. It's not like other fan fiction, okay? And Sean Astin is not homophobic anyway, so why would it possibly be weird for him? I can see why he might be disappointed or upset to read a fic where Frodo and Sam were portrayed as simply lusting after one another or shagging casually, but reading fics where they, to paraphrase Tolkien deliberately out of context, comfort one another with their arms and bodies, or where emotional and spiritual love simply blossoms into physical affection, especially considering the respectful, lyrical, genuinely beautiful ways that most of the authors here treat those truly love-making scenes. I would be genuinely surprised if he were to be offended. Bit of Earth was also planning to put together like a physical book, a tribute book to Sam and Sean Astin, and to bind it in red leather like the Red Book of Westmark from Lord of the Rings, and then to give that book to Sean Astin. Members continued to debate on this about how much separation should there be between actors and creators and their fandoms, which I think is a really interesting debate, which is probably why I'm mentioning this even though it's not that important to the overall story of this video. Someone said, hey guys, but aren't we doing copyright infringement? Like, we do copyright infringement here, right? Like, what if the Tolkien estate ever decided to pull an Anne Rice on us? Like, maybe it's better for us if we stay a little under the radar? To which VB had to say, psh, Tolkien would have loved gay fanfiction. Shut up, idiot. VB and Abby were starting to become pretty close internet friends. Abby said about VB around this time, she's even more obsessed than I, and she shares. She's one of the most brilliant authors and artists I've ever seen, and yet she tells me my work is beautiful beyond words. She has opened the doors to a world I'd only dreamed of and held my hand at the threshold. She's the most perceptive woman I've ever met, and has a sensitivity that crosses endless boundaries. I don't think it even has boundaries. She's 16 hours in a chair and watching the sun come up and knowing I'll be tired for a week, but happy anyway. And it is around this time that VB revealed his psychic abilities to Abby. We have this chat log between them that is from sometime early 2002, I think February or March. Abby gave this to some of her friends to try and explain what was going on with VB. It has of course been widely circulated since then. It is all published in Janine's book. So VB had found this psychic priestess to be his master and teacher in these things. His master had informed him that he was a psychic warrior aligned with war gods like Ares. My master says that some of the creatures of Middle-earth, elves, dragons, dwarves, existed much as described as being other than man long ago, because there are artifacts found beyond the capability of the cultures they are found in, and there are just too damn many myths from tribes that never knew each other, countries that never collided, that are all the same. There must be some basis in reality, even twisted as it is, by thousands of centuries of myth. Abby says, I agree, I really do. VB says, I know a lad who was a dragon in a past life. It's no different than my master's brother having been a horse. Abby said, I need to find a master. VB said, I talked to her about this, actually, if you don't mind. Abby said, interested? She says that the surge of interest in Tolkien's Middle-earth has created a huge explosion of creational energy, which is a powerful force, not only through the fans, but through the thousands of deeply devoted people in the production itself. That energy has been directed so strongly towards the idea of elves and ents and such, that the real star spirits and tree spirits are reaching to it, reaching out in return. Abby said, oh? VB said, but no spiritual energy or spirit can manifest purely in the mind of any but the most deeply trained and gifted. So like any spirit or god or divine, they come through a form we can comprehend. This is why the gods of any culture resemble the bodies and customs of that culture. In our case, they reach out to us through the most closely identified aspects. Hobbits. Abby said, nodding. She says I'm being contacted by the warrior spirit. He's been called everything from Thor to Ares to Set over the ages, trying to use Soldier Mary as an avenue to tap my creational energies. Right, so this war god that VB is aligned with also manifests as Mary. He then tells Abby that she is aligned with like this nurturing mother goddess who manifests as Pippin. I think that in her book, Janine summarizes the lore at play here in a good way. Tolkien may have thought he was composing fiction in his tales of elves, dragons, dwarves, and hobbits, but VB understood that he actually recorded a real history. The tales of Glaurung and Turin, Beren and Luthien and Frodo Baggins and the Ring of Power really happened, only to be forgotten, and took with them all the remnants of magic from the world of men. Somehow, Tolkien became attuned to the spiritual emanations of the elves in Valinor, and was receiving their memories. Tolkien attributed their tales to his imagination, but VB discovered the truth Rue's secret, and now she too was receiving messages from Calimac Brandigamba, whose name was anglicized by Tolkien as Meriadoc Brandybuck. Abby further explains it here. The Earth exists in multiple dimensional layers simultaneously. What we would consider the afterlife is just a different layer, as if we were one radio station and the afterlife was on the next channel. Thus, ghost sightings, haunted places, etc. were just where there was interference from the next plane over. The same explanation held for another layer, which was where the elves and hobbits were. In the Lord of the Rings books, it's called the Undying Lands. Human mythology and religion are often explanations of how these layers of reality can bleed over in certain places for certain people. VB could channel other consciousnesses. It was a rare mutation, among others the Oracle of Delphi also had it. His own consciousness would cease to be, and his brain essentially was taken over by the electrical patterns of whoever was possessing him. He could bring people from any of these layers, including current living people, provided they were either heavily intoxicated or capable of astral travel. And yes, this channeling ability was called the Mind Hole. The first time I googled fanfiction, I was reading the fan lore page just to get an overview, and the line, "This ability was called the Mind Hole," absolutely sent me off the edge. It's called the Mind Hole. These other consciousnesses that VB would channel were referred to as, shockingly, the Others. The Others referred to VB as the Chief. Abby was referred to as the Constant. She was chosen for this role for a variety of reasons, one being that she had the feminine mother energy, which was a good contrast to VB's masculine war god energies. She also, according to VB, had low-level psychic abilities, which would allow her to sense things sometimes. She also was Tolkien in a past life. Lots of fun details like that are just never gonna come up again. But oh my god! Early on, they tried to initiate other internet friends into the Hobbit channeling sessions, but those friends either got weirded out very quickly or thought it was LARPing, and then got extremely weirded out when they realized it was not LARPing. From April 5th to 7th, 2002, VB attended a fan convention called Connections. And oh buddy, he made an impression. Many years ago, I met VB at a fan-run convention in the Mid-Atlantic. We, friends and I, were sitting on a bench, wrestling great themes to the mat, when he came stopped in front of us and just stood there, glittering. He was perfect. Perfect coif, cutest little dress, and just the biggest blue eyes you ever saw. We, being old and jaded, said, "Yes," as in, "You want something, young person?" And he moved on. But seriously, if you equate youth and beauty with truth and goodness, I can see how you get in trouble. Was this Connections? That's where I met VB. He was excited that we were both younger fans. He was really outgoing and seemed to love being the center of attention. I remember this odd English accent, which I realize now was fake, but it gave him some mystery. He was wearing a cute, tight, short red dress. To be blunt, he just looked like a hot girl, and that was kind of rare at that year's con. At one point, he was lying on the floor, being playful in front of some older women, and one of them was just staring at him, starstruck. I remember thinking that VB had really captivated people and made himself the star of the con. Through all the ensuing drama over the years, I was never surprised that he'd managed to get a stronghold over anyone he knew IRL. IDK if that Nani's anonymous posters, con was Connections, but mine certainly was. Though VB didn't have the blue eyes at that point, that was just after the alleged Eye of Sauron eye infection from the contacts. So we got a lot of, "I wish you could see me with my blue eyes, then I look just like Elijah Wood." I may count as one of those older women, though I was 29 at the time. I definitely spent a lot of time staring starstruckedly at VB, who was, 18 then? This was right after the Eye of Sauron incident, when he got an eye infection. I think he may have told various stories about the cause, and therefore couldn't wear his blue contacts, which was a big deal to him because OMG, if he was wearing them, we'd be able to see how much he really looked like Elijah Wood. He didn't, without them in person or with them in later pictures I've seen. He bounced around in PJs for most of the first night and generally got introduced as an adorable baby Slash fan at her at the time, and he gave out his birth name freely at that point. First convention. One night, not sure if it was the same Friday or the following Saturday when he was wearing the red dress, he got so blind drunk that the EMTs were called when he passed out, or possibly in the morning when he was super hungover, but they just did your basic first aid, made sure he was okay, and left. He brought a bunch of Lord of the Ring vids for the vid show, which weren't terribly individual, but were long and repetitive. People lost patience with that. If this was Connections we're talking about, I was there too. I basically remember VB as really cute as a pixie, which certainly entranced some con attendees, boring the fuck out of the entire vid show with endless Lord of the Rings vids all set to the same kind of morose music, and then getting so drunk I believe they had to take her to the hospital. VB certainly did make an impression that weekend, but it wasn't an overwhelmingly positive one by a long shot. That being said, a lot of people were acting very protective of VB as a newbie fan with so much potential from what I remember. It was a very weird scene. At Connections, VB also cheated on his boyfriend and hooked up with a girl for the first time, one of his online friends he'd gotten the chance to meet in real life by the username of Versifile. Things changed quite a bit for VB after Connections. He went months without posting to Bit of Earth at all. He anguished constantly on his personal live journal about what to do about relationships, how he loved his fiancée as a person, but he was so attracted to Versifile, and he was so torn between the two of them. April 19th is known as the Great Hobbit Brain Dump, in which he received the memories of Merry from the Hobbit from the books. The events of the last 48 hours have been interesting, to say the least. When I took the oaths of a paladin and began training, I expected spirit plane battles. I expected that I might be asked to do extraordinary things, but I didn't expect it. Same as any soldier. They know that soldier equals war, but there is still a sense of, oh fuck, when the bullets start flying. I am suddenly old. I have all of his memories, all of them, from toddler to the day that he died. Over 100 years of memories, every day, every moment, crystal clear in full sensory detail. He's 5 times my age in life years. I don't know what to do with this. It's overwhelming me by sheer massive memory. I know things now. I understand things that I'm just too young to, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't even think in the same language anymore. My own cradle tongue is now something as if learned, something I have to translate into speech and text. My thoughts come in the words of his youth. The language that VB is talking about here is Westron, which is the language spoken by men and hobbits in the Lord of the Rings books. Westron is not like Elvish in that, like, Elvish is a language that you can learn and speak. Tolkien did not write about Westron in nearly that level of detail. He coined about a couple hundred vocabulary words for it, some of which are not even published anywhere. They're just, like, in his personal notes in the archives. But yeah, Westron is not a learnable, speakable language. But did that deter VB? Absolutely not. So according to VB, Mary's real name was Callimac Brandagamba. He started a live journal account in the name Callimac Brandagamba and used that account to document some of Mary's memories, as well as to document the Westron language that he was learning. David Sallow, the linguist who worked as a consultant on the Lord of the Rings movies, actually had a chance to look at VB's Westron vocabulary and had some interesting comments. Sallow said, Tolkien wrote more about Westron than has been published, and those documents are now in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I have seen them. I have a very good idea of what Westron looks like. David noted that around 130 of the words were authentic Westron, coined by Tolkien and reported on websites. If the quote-unquote channelers were truly tapping into the same source as Tolkien, they should have also reproduced some of the Westron words from the records in Milwaukee that Tolkien wrote but never published. Needless to say, they did not. David did some linguistic snooping to suss out the remaining pseudo-Westron. He said, the primary source for the words, and I think overall structure of the word list, was an online modern English to Old English glossary. The person or persons who manipulated this text would convert an Old English word to a pseudo-Westron word by the simple expedients of dropping one or more letters from the end of the word, dropping a few letters at the beginning of the word, or changing a couple of letters. He also identified some of the words as Hungarian. In the midst of all of this, Adrian breaks off his relationship with VB, and the two agree to remain best friends. That is, of course, until Adrian betrays VB. He shows VB's parents his live journal, which is filled with gay hobbit sex, as well as personal journal entries about his own sexuality. VB wrote, I've just been outed to my parents, not only as a lesbian, but as a slasher. A slasher! An all-around freak. They saw my LJ in relation to this incident. I've lost my real-life best friend. I may not be moving to Atlanta after all. There is talk of mental institutions. My schoolwork is way behind and threatening to tank utterly. I ran out of antidepressants 3 weeks ago, and the parents are dragging their feet on refilling the prescription. I may be getting another eye infection. My best online friends are decompensating. My muses have committed mass suicide. I may be so caught up in my own shit lately that I have potentially killed things with the new girlfriend. I'm trying unsuccessfully to deal with the sudden dump of over 100 years of crystal clear memories from the sort of life that would keep a shrink happy for millennia. I no longer think in English, and no one else currently living speaks the language I do think in now. He wrote that his parents were violently homophobic, that his father was inviting men over over and forcing him to have sex with them. Adrian later told a much less dramatic version of events from his point of view. I met her back in 2001 after having just moved to the United States and enrolling in university. I took an interest in the theater department there, and she and I met through working on a play. She was an extra and I was a stagehand. We hung out a lot, began dating about a month later. In my time socializing with her, I became immune to the power of shock from learning of quote-unquote coincidence. She delighted in informing me of so many things that were just within the realm of possibility, but outside expectations. It didn't take long before I started being suspicious of many things she'd said. She claimed her best friend's birthday was the same as mine, and while we'd all three been hanging out, it had come up again. He'd seemed surprised and simply stated, "My birthday isn't in June." This happened more and more often, and I realized she was inventing so many small things as she believed I was awed by coincidence and loved to hear of them. I'd already been subject to many real ones from other goings-on. She didn't want to be left out. I also noted her inability to ever be wrong, and her cowardice at being challenged. She just couldn't handle being questioned. Time and time again, her parents would accuse her of having made an error, which would be followed by a long drawn-out story of how she'd tried so hard, but everything was stacked against her. And then we'd go someplace alone together, and she'd cry into my shoulder about how evil and controlling her parents are. I started to believe it, something I now regret, despite that I never acted on such feelings. I also posted a few times in her live journal, referring to issues she felt passionate about, though my opinions did not agree with hers. These were quickly deleted, and she very sheepishly asked me in person if it had been me, and would I please stop. Considering my feelings for her, I assured her I would put it out of my mind. After reading a few of the wanks, as they're called around here, I've seen that she had labeled me in the exact same way she had labeled her parents. Anything that is not putty to her hands, she couldn't tolerate. It was when she moved out of her home that I noticed everything going wrong. It would have been around early to mid-2002 to memory. She moved in with her cousin, walking distance from my house and close to the university, so as you could well imagine, we spent even more time together. When that happens, when you let someone that close to you, you can't help but let things be seen. I watched as she fell apart. Before then, she'd been pretty normal. Yes, she lied instinctively, but she seemed, on the whole, a pretty normal person. We all have our shortcomings, so I just discarded it and trusted her, but when she moved out, it all changed. She became apathetic about life and broke down frequently about needing to leave. She started to eat whatever was available instead of buying fresh food, so would consume ice cream with an inch layer of mold. When entrusted with the care of a rabbit, she ignored it, not feeding nor watering nor cleaning the cage, letting it die. This may have been deliberate, as she frequently hinted at her dislike towards the animal, simply because it was too big to be a normal rabbit. Upon her return from Connections, she confronted me about her lesbianism, claiming someone had come up to her after a fanfic reading and stuck her tongue down her throat. She'd protested, of course, but this had been the trigger, forcing her to spend her entire time locked away in her room, quote, sitting on my hands so as not to cheat on me even by accident. My suspicions of her flew through the roof when she started receiving phone calls, which she'd go through great lengths of speaking only in whatever form of Elvish she claimed it to be. She finally moved to Washington, D.C. around July of 2002, and we broke up via telephone a month later. She gave a crying story about how she'd gone for a walk and found the gay quarter of D.C., and how she felt so alone and outcast despite our relationship, and she just wished she could be herself. I pulled the plug on us, and I have not heard from her to this day. Being that she'd been munching on crisps/Pringles/whatever during the conversation, I didn't take too much to heart anymore. VB was now free to be with Versiphile. However, that relationship ultimately only ended up lasting about a month. In June, VB flew to Oregon to visit Abby, where he channeled Lord of the Rings characters in real life for her. Abby began distancing herself from her friends and husband, captivated by VB's fascinating stories. VB, who had just dumped Versiphile, saying she couldn't handle a relationship immediately, leaped into one with Abby. On June 2nd, 2002, VB went to Oregon and met Abby at last. They had a delightful time chatting with the channeled Merry and Pippin, much to the dismay of bystanders, except for the proprietor of a pagan shop, who could actually see Merry and took it upon himself to cast a protective spell over Abby. They went with friends on a road trip to Astoria, Oregon. Abby and VB spent much of the 2-hour drive to the coast chatting in Westron. Pippin even insisted they stop for a Slurpee, having become fond of them while inhabiting the body of Billy Boy during the filming of the Lord of the Rings movies. Abby said, Merry had quickly uncovered my unholy passion for juicy gossip. He'd been supplying me with tales of the Fellowship actors for days, but on this day he was unable to access Dom, it's Dominic Monaghan, so he thought he'd try dipping into Elijah's memories, and when he came back he had a lot of Elijah's mannerisms, including a fierce desire for a cigarette. I gave him 2, but neither he nor VB could handle the smoke. As I refused to give him more cigarettes, he tried to duck back into Elijah to get a buzz, but somehow managed to fall in, and in the process, Elijah was knocked into VB? Abby said, reflecting on the experience in 2014, I was exposed to the full force of his charm and charisma. He knew me so well, so fast, or so it seemed. I felt comfortable, excited, important, loved. Oh, and so special. Most important, I was feeling things, which in the fog of depression was a light in the darkness. In the fall, Abby then flew out to visit VB, and the two of them once again had an exhilarating time chatting with channeled hobbits and whatnot. VB wanted to move out to Oregon to live with Abby permanently, and Abby and her husband agreed. VB came out and moved into their spare bedroom. Shortly afterwards, Abby and her husband split up. She said of her marriage, "My marriage wasn't terrible or abusive, but I don't think there was much love there from either side. We got married because it was the next thing to do, and there wasn't a whole lot of spark. Deep down, I knew before the wedding that it wasn't going to last, but I also decided, at 22, that this was the best I could do. Once we lost the distraction of college classes, it evolved into just playing house, but that play acting in place of a real relationship let my depression flourish. The only times I felt much of anything was when I'd go to the movies with my girlfriends. Every time I came back from the theater, I felt like Dorothy returning to Kansas." The final thing that broke their marriage was the house going into foreclosure. Abby says that her husband had been in charge of the household finances, and that he just hadn't been paying their mortgage. They split up over that. Her husband moved out of the house, leaving a jobless Abby and VB living in a house that was going into foreclosure. The two of them then did what any rational person would do in this situation, which is they invited a bunch more fandom friends to come move in and party. The group referred to their new home as Bag End and themselves as the Bag Enders. You will most commonly hear them referred to by the names Diamond, Little Sam, and Shopping Cart Bob. None of these were their real names. Abby has said that she thinks the name changes were just one of the ways that the cult expressed ownership over its members. She wrote, "I think that moving in other friends was a tremendous step forward for him. He didn't have time to be the storyteller online because he was living with me, but now he could gather people in a concrete location, which he, through manipulation, completely controlled. Our housemates were a sheltered young woman who was just leaving her strict Christian upbringing, that's Diamond, a vulnerable and tender tough guy who wanted to be loved, the Shopping Cart Bob, and a 14-year-old girl staying with us with her mother's permission. That's Little Sam. Perfect new recruits." And I know you're wondering, about why they had a child living with them, but so I'm gonna read this for you. Little Sam said about her mother in 2011, "Yes, she knew where I was. She had kind of an idea how we were living, which is why she sent me grocery money every week. Lots of people have a problem with what my mom did, but a lot of people don't understand how messed up I was. I threatened multiple times to just cut her out of my life if she didn't allow me to go. I was a rotten little brat, and I'm damn lucky she tried to support me in all of my endeavors." At this point, what VB was doing here was building a cult. Abby says that according to VB, each of the Bag Enders had like a guardian elf who was like a parental figure to them. Those guiding parental figures, of course, spoke through VB. She says there was also a doctor elf who dispensed medical advice, mostly natural medicine that was scientifically completely unsound. She also said about VB, what he actually did was 24/7 LARPing. He fully became that other, spoke with a different accent, wrote with different handwriting, had different mannerisms, full-on characters that he acted out. He's very talented, although that creepy something about him prevents him from working as an actor. You have to work up to that level of intensity. He switched between them by closing his eyes and sort of jerking, just like every medium in every movie ever about mediums. Interestingly though, not all of the roommates had equal exposure to these supernatural elements of the cult. Abby, of course, was the closest person to VB. She had maximum exposure to it. Diamond and Little Sam had some. They had their guardian elves and all of that. Bob's position was really interesting though. He knew about the channeling. He just didn't really believe in it or feel a need to get involved with it. He has said that he actually had previous similar cult experience before this, communicating with supposed other planes of existence that are portrayed in fiction, and he was weirdly numb to it. Bob wrote, "All the time we lived in Salem and then later San Dimas, I spent dropping hints to Sam and Di as loud as I could. I had thought that Di might be too intelligent to be duped, but in retrospect, I know that she just renounced the church of her parents, and to some extent their god as well. She was in the perfect place to be recruited. Without proper deprogramming, it is easy for one to float from one cult to another. I tried the tact with her of subtly hinting that we were being lied to, but nothing stuck with either of them. I've always had that big brother need to protect everyone complex, and I felt I'd failed miserably on that occasion. And when the time came to leave, I felt horrible that I hadn't and couldn't do more to get them out of there. Abby, whom I did love and still do love with all my heart, I had thought of as a lost cause, that she was so deeply entrenched in the madness that there was nothing I could do to help her, that if she were ever to get out of it, it would be on her own terms." The characters that VB channeled were referred to as the others. Abby wrote, "Once we met the others, they always wanted to talk. There was almost constant drama, day or night, emergencies and fights, questions and on. You might be called on to mediate a dispute, help solve a mystery, or try to explain something from the future to someone, it was almost guaranteed that the moment you'd started to drift off to sleep, someone would want to talk to you. And sleep deprivation is the first thing they teach you in Brainwashing 101. I guess the best way to describe how it unfolded was that it was like living inside a video game. You could go on missions, unlock characters, earn bonus things, and get rewards, but it was a 24-hour game you could never escape and that woke you up when you tried to rest. Okay. This brings us to the 1-year anniversary of 9/11. Sean Astin was really big into social justice and volunteering, and on the 1-year anniversary of 9/11, he was in Washington, D.C., where he hosted this event giving out awards to students for community service, and then afterwards attended the 9/11 memorial service at the Pentagon. That very same day, Bit of Earth, so VB, announced Project Eleanor, a charitable event that was just perfectly designed as like this honeypot for Sean Astin. The name Eleanor is after Sam's daughter in the books, who briefly in like one scene in the movies is portrayed by Sean Astin's daughter. One of the social issues that was very near and dear to his heart also was children's literacy. So they took that, children's literacy. They took this idea of kind of like rebuilding after 9/11. They took this idea of Sam Gamgee being a gardener, and they created this, in response to the Unity in the Spirit of America service program, in support of which Sean Astin will be appearing in Washington, D.C. on the morning of September 11th, 2002. BitOfEarth.net would like to announce Project Eleanor, with tear-stained excavations of Ground Zero now turning toward talk of memorial parks and rebuilding, and with the Pentagon scarred but standing, it is time for rebuilding, for planting, for new life and togetherness. As a fan community ostensibly organized in honor of a gardener, a father, a comrade, a companion, a servant, and a community leader, we see this call for service, for planting anew, as a call we feel particularly keenly, and would like to extend more than our mere good wishes. Our plan is to select a charity organization in the Portland, Oregon area that supports reading programs for children, due both to Sam's role as the keeper of the Red Book of Westmark and Mr. Astin's special interest in children's literacy, and to landscape the grounds surrounding it. The exact organization will be chosen by size and need, based primarily upon the amount of public support we receive for Project Eleanor. It is our hope to be able to thoroughly landscape the chosen site, complete with flower beds, pathways, and birdhouses, and bird baths to encourage wildlife. Cool. Okay. We're doing landscaping for charity now. Step 1, Hobbit sex. Step 2, landscaping. The date was September 11th, 2002. Sean Astin, Washington, D.C., attending events, yes, okay. Waiting in the crowd for him was VB. VB approached Sean Astin and inquired if he would like to participate in this cool new thing called Project Eleanor. The idea of mobilizing the Lord of the Rings fandom for a positive cause really appealed to Astin. He agreed to be a part of Project Eleanor. He gave his contact information to VB. Astin was a huge name, especially in Lord of the Rings fandom. He was like one of the biggest names. So his confirmed participation in Project Eleanor really brought a lot of new members to Bit of Earth, a lot of fandom notoriety for them. After coming into possession of Sean Astin's precious contact information, Abby and VB began telling this story in fandom. The two of them apparently had been concerned for Elijah Wood's health, because they had noticed in PR photos that he seemed to be losing weight, and now being obvious besties with Sean Astin, they had decided to bring this up to him. Sean replied that he was also concerned, because Elijah was depressed and not eating well. Sean asked Abby if it would be alright for him to give her phone number to Elijah. He thought Elijah might feel better if he had a friend like her to talk to. Abby was willing to give it a shot. Elijah called Abby and they became great friends. He flew her up to Washington at his expense to have dinner with him. "I can't tell anyone because they wouldn't believe me," Abby wrote to a friend. "I'm an Abby Sue." She told her closest friends how Elijah was in love with Dominic Monaghan and felt confused about his sexual orientation, but eventually he realized he loved Dom as a soulmate. Abby encouraged Elijah to vent some of his stressors in the form of an anonymous live journal, so he set up a journal called Padawan S. He maintained this for a few months, keeping his identity secret, but kept dropping accidental hints, such as music preferences, and was absent on dates which coincided with his public appearances. The problem with the whole Elijah story was that no one bought it. Abby's LiveJournal entries about her friendship with Elijah and Padawan S's true identity were restricted from the general public knowledge, but word of her boastful claims spread anyway. People quickly got tired of this obvious farce and started shunning Abby and VB. Regulars of the Yahoo board stopped posting and didn't register at the fledgling Bit of Earth website. Abby finally confessed to her closest friends that she had fibbed about the phone calls to Sean. In reality, VB was simply channeling Elijah, and authored the Padawan S journal while under the influence of his astral projection. That explanation didn't go over any better. Shockingly, on November 3rd, 2002, VB made his final posts on both the Bit of Earth Yahoo group and his personal LiveJournal and said that he would be leaving fandom forever. It has been unofficial for several months now, but I regret that I must now officially withdraw from online fandom. Not just Lord of the Rings, but all of it. I cannot go into the various reasons, but I will always miss and treasure the kind and talented friends that I've made here. This will be my last post. He bequeathed Bit of Earth in its entirety to Abby, and went poof into the ether. Bit of Earth moved off of Yahoo groups and exclusively onto its own Bit of Earth website. So, what was that all about? Well, VB, he died. This genuinely is what Abby believed at the time. She wrote, "At some point, the original female inhabitant of his body just refused to return, which was in essence the non-corporeal version of committing suicide. The body, needing a core program, duplicated the last person who he had channeled. Thus, he became Jordan, which was short for Elijah Jordan Wood." My dudes, do you ever just commit soul suicide and then get replaced by the duplicate soul of Elijah Wood? So relatable. From this point forward, the person formerly known as VB or Victoria Bitter became known as Jordan and used exclusively he/him pronouns. In December, the second Lord of the Rings movie, The Two Towers, premiered. A cinema in Portland sold out all 10 of its theaters on the night of the premiere, which meant that roughly 5,000 people were waiting outside of the theater to see the movie. Bit of Earth organized what they called a line party. I've never heard the term line party before researching this video, but apparently, is it a common thing? I don't know. They had a line party. They had a party in the line. They had DJs, they had trivia, they had a raffle. VB was, of course, nowhere to be found, having withdrawn from fandom. Abby was there, running everything with her new boyfriend, Jordan. This was his social christening. Abby wrote, "That event was a success, insomuch as it wasn't a big enough event to fuck up. We still managed to fuck up parts, the tent almost blew away, the radio promos never happened, because Jordan creeped out the DJs, and the trivia questions got lost. Okay, in retrospect, it was kind of a failure, but nothing bad happened, and people had a blast, and we made a bunch of friends." The year was now 2003. The message board on the Bit of Earth website was titled The Prancing Pony, and in February of 2003, that message board was hacked. So if anybody clicked on it, it redirected to this LiveJournal post by Versafile. That's right, VB's ex-girlfriend. This post by Versafile was regarding the fate of VB. The post featured pictures of VB and Abby, pictures of Jordan, and pointed out that these were the same person. This image was caught just before Abby deleted it from the Bit of Earth server when she was confronted with the question of Mr. Frodo's identity. Okay, Jordan also used Mr. Frodo as a pseudonym a lot online at this point. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, Mr. Frodo is Victoria Bitter. Victoria Bitter is not dead, and Victoria Bitter is living with Orange Blossom. That was Abby's username. Honestly, I wouldn't believe a single word out of either of them ever again. They're blatant liars and throw around wild accusations when confronted with the truth. Faking your death online does not make you a sympathetic character, nor lying about it to cover up your antics. Give up. Give up. It's fucking scathing. Despite her harsh words, though, Versafile actually disapproved of the tactic of hacking the Prancing Pony message board to try and get her post around. She was not responsible for doing it herself. This tactic was not really that effective here, because most of the Bit of Earth members were just really mad that their message board was lost. They were too mad about that to really pay attention to the issue at hand here. Abby immediately denied Versafile's claim that VB and Jordan were the same person. I know this because VB, A, was also my girlfriend at one point, B, is dead and therefore not on LiveJournal, and C, I just got out of bed with a very not female Jordan, who was VB did move out here. That doesn't mean she's still here. As a matter of fact, she died this fall, and I have tried to keep this offline because frankly, it's nobody's fucking business. I am aware of the fact that people fake deaths and have new handles to cover it, and there was no obituary. She was new to town and committed suicide. I didn't see any reason to send an obit to the paper. If this little debacle ever did cause any dip in Bit of Earth's following, that following was probably almost immediately regained. Promotion of Project Eleanor was all over Fandom, including on theonering.net, which was like the biggest hub for all Lord of the Rings related content at the time. Many Lord of the Rings fans came across posts like this. One of those fans was Janine Renee. Janine Renee of the book. In early 2003, she was pregnant, experiencing crippling morning sickness, and stuck inside her home a lot of the time. As a result, she spent a lot of time online, discovered online fandom, and became very big into online fandom. And she lived in Oregon, where Bit of Earth planned to build their garden. So she joined them and signed up to volunteer for Project Eleanor. There was a slight problem going on behind the scenes with Project Eleanor, though. You see, Abby and Jordan had started promoting this event without consulting the public library branch that they had selected as the location for the garden they were going to build. The library staff was surprised. They were surprised to learn about this. They told Abby and Jordan that this garden was a very nice idea and all, but they could not afford to take on the extra maintenance costs. Abby and Jordan then stood outside of the library, stopping people on the sidewalk to try and get them to sign a petition for the library to get a garden, which also did not work. They ended up selecting a different location, the Riggs Institute in Beaverton, Oregon. The garden plans were hastily adapted to fit that location, which left a lot of volunteers who had been in charge of getting plants and materials and things scrambling, feeling used and unappreciated. Janine, in fact, found herself dealing with a crisis on the eve of Project Eleanor. Jordan called a few days later, saying there was one little project with which he needed help. The woman in charge of arranging the lumber for the garden deck, well, she just decided one day that she was tired of helping and wasn't going to do any more volunteering for us. She started working things out with a lumber mill, but then she just stopped answering their calls and stuff. They got pretty mad, and now they won't have anything more to do with us. I have so many things going on right now. If you could take over that for me and get lumber donated for a 30 by 30 cedar deck, that would really help a lot. Boy, it just stinks when you have to depend on volunteers and they flake out on you. I've had first-hand experience with that. I once worked on a barrier island off the South Carolina coast where we rescued sea turtle eggs by moving new nests. Okay, cool, Janine, cool. Besides, how hard could it be to get a few pieces of wood donated here in logging country? Much to my surprise, I learned I was asking for around $3,000 worth of wood, and for immediate delivery. 3 days of constant long-distance phone calls later, and I finally found a Portland company, Par Lumber, that was willing to help out. Par couldn't do it outright, but they sold it to BOE at a cost of $1,800, and they agreed to accept payment in 3 weeks, after the project's donations were tallied. Jordan piled on the kudos, making me feel like an important cog in a really cool machine. The night before the Project Eleanor garden construction was to take place, Bit of Earth hosted a screening of The Two Towers, which was hosted by Sean Astin. He gave a speech and answered questions from an audience of 600 people. Abby also gave a speech and announced that they had raised $3,000 and that all proceeds would go to the organization Reading is Fundamental. Now that is deceptive wording. Because at this point, yes, they had raised $3,000, but they knew that most of that money was going to go to costs for the garden. So yes, any proceeds left after paying for the garden would have gone to Reading is Fundamental, but they knew full well there was not going to be any money left over. Abby says that Jordan often wrote speeches for her and put her in the public eye instead of him, even though behind the scenes she didn't have much to do with the organizing of a lot of these events. Her only real job, she says, was taking care of Jordan and all of the others. The day of the garden building arrived, and yes, in case you're wondering, Jordan did show up in a fake cast to avoid doing any of the work himself. Looking back on it 10 years later in 2013, Abby wrote, "I was newly divorced, had filled my already in foreclosure house with friends, and was seeing the fruition of a project I had put my whole heart into. I was elated, joyous, and truly believed I had stepped out of the dull, gray, boring life I'd fallen into since college. This was the new, improved me, better and happier than ever. That was from the inside. From the outside, I was an immature, irresponsible, vain, selfish child, obsessed with popularity, and with my secret life with Andy, although he was still Jordan Wood then. Also, I whined a lot. Although I can see the good qualities in what I was doing, mostly I am ashamed and hideously embarrassed at my behavior, and the overtly stupid decisions we were making. I definitely knew we were in over our heads, but I think I was having too much fun to care. Andy's behavior was distracting and bizarre, and mine was just embarrassing, to the point that both of us got a talking to. It is a horrifying experience to have a personal hero and legitimate celebrity pull you in private and chastise you. Sean Astin came to the project in good faith. He was an incredibly hard worker, kind, genuine, gregarious, inspiring. Honestly, he was everything we thought he would be and then some. And I wish I still had his respect, but I lost it. And not just because of Andy's lies and manipulations. When Sean pulled me aside and talked to me, it cut right to my heart. He called me out on the more outrageous parts of my attention-seeking. He also said good things and inspiring things, but those aren't what stuck with me. Just the intensity of his eyes and the blunt honesty of his words. I truly wanted to do a good thing. Even if there was selfishness in my motivation, I believed in the project. It hurts me to this day that Myrna, who ran the institute where the garden was built, died thinking she was scammed. The garden was real, the work was real, the intent was real. It was just us who fucked the whole thing up with our inexperience and lies. We were the lie, not the project. Astin worked hard, got down in the dirt like the lovable gardener character they all knew him to be. Despite all of the scrambling behind the scenes, things really did come together on the day of, and the project was considered a great success. So, fast forward to early summer. Abby and Jordan and their crew of roommates, the Bag Enders, had been living in Abby's house, which she previously shared with her husband, which was in foreclosure. They now had until the end of July to leave, and they reached out to the Bit of Earth community for help. This was an issue central to Bit of Earth, right? Because if the group had to lose their home and possibly all split up into different living situations, then all of these great events they were planning for the year were probably gonna fall through. Janine took pity on them. I felt sorry for the kids. I've seen several girlfriends get financially wiped out by vindictive exes in similar ways. I asked some good friends about empty basements or rental properties, but no one wanted to take on 4 smokers rent-free for 2 months. Crazy. The kids found a small cheap unit in a rough neighborhood. I paid 2 months' rent and deposit up front, plus a few utility hookups, totaling $1,635. Janine began to get closer to the Bag Enders, or the Hobbit kids as she calls them. She visited them at their apartment a lot, where she had some long personal conversations with Jordan. He explained to her that he was descended from a infamous IRA crime family, but he has to live in exile because he wants nothing to do with the family business. But he knows too much, so if they're able to locate him, they're going to kill him. Janine also confronted Jordan about his gender, as she believed him to be female. She thinks this because he has dainty hands and doesn't know how to use power tools. I shit you not, she's like, this guy's not a real man, because he doesn't know how to drive a nail. Jordan assured me he really was male. He had a rare testosterone resistance disorder, which feminized his features. He explained that he had enough testosterone, it was a genetic defect in the testosterone receptors causing the effects. His explanation was very sophisticated, and when I looked it up that night in my Harrison's textbook of internal medicine, sure enough, the symptoms of this extremely rare disease were just as Jordan described. There was one detail that didn't match Jordan's story. The disease described in my book were X-linked genetic illnesses passed down from mother to son. Jordan explained his cousin also had this disease, and that their fathers were brothers. Yet the defective genes would have had to come from their moms. That's okay though, because he could have a different variant. She doesn't know if there's another variant, but she's maybe there could be another variant. Besides, I was too busy trying to wrap my head around Jordan's comments about his cousin. That is, his cousin, Elijah Wood. The cousin that apparently shared the testosterone resistance disorder was Elijah Wood. Elijah Wood had also gotten Jordan a job on the set of the Lord of the Rings movies. That's how he had the contact information of these prestigious cast members like Sean Astin, obviously. So Janine says, wait. Okay, so you are on the run from your IRA crime family because you didn't want to be part of their family business and they're totally gonna murder you if they find you. But your cousin is Elijah Wood, so where does Elijah Wood stand in the whole IRA crime family business situation? It was public knowledge that Elijah Wood was not on good terms with his father. Janine already knew this, being a massive Lord of the Rings stan, and Jordan told her, well, now you know why. Don't worry though, he never knew all that much about the IRA inner workings, which is why he wasn't worth assassinating, but Jordan was. So this brings us to the next Bit of Earth event. Buckle up, because it is only downhill. September 25th to 26th. Hall of Fire Music Festival. Bob had connections in the local music scene, which allowed him to put together a lineup of bands, and secure high-quality sound equipment for the festival, all for free. Bit of Earth's real dream for this event, though, was to have Elijah Wood come and MC it. And they spread rumors that he would, despite the fact that he was in New Zealand filming Return of the King at the time. Despite this, one BOE member named Zinnia was told that he definitely would be there. Jordan instructed her to secure flights for Elijah Wood, so she took to the message boards to convince users to donate their frequent flyer points so that she could purchase the tickets, and she did manage to collect enough to purchase the tickets. She purchased the tickets, only to be told days before the event that actually he would not be attending. Volunteers and bands showed up and began setting up on July 25th, only to immediately be approached by a park ranger who informed them that there was no permit for a festival in the park that day. Frantic phone calls were made to Bit of Earth headquarters and received no response. Thankfully, Jordan was soon spotted in the park where the festival was meant to be held, but they had no permits. He was just sitting in the park lounging. He reacted to the news that they didn't have permits with shock. He said that he had tasked a Bit of Earth member by the username of Miss Tree with securing them. The park ranger informed Jordan that the event would be allowed to take place on the following day if they were able to secure permits in time. The bands they had booked had driven hours, the sound equipment guy was volunteering his time for free, not to mention all of the regular people volunteering their time. And everyone had to pack it up and go home. Miss Tree began receiving angry messages accusing her of causing the festival's downfall, which was news to her, because she'd never been asked to obtain any permits. She attempted to explain this on the Bit of Earth message board, only to find that all of her posts were very quickly deleted. Jordan did manage to obtain permits for an event on the following day. However, by then the damage had already been done. Only one of the scheduled performers actually showed up. They apparently had to resort to begging a street musician to go up just to have somebody occupy the stage. And still, there was no audience for this performance. Janine reports that the festival was mainly successful at just annoying the regular park goers. Sean Astin called in to this very sad festival that was going on to be interviewed on stage by Abby. However, there was a surprise waiting. Sean said, "Okay, well, I'm actually calling today for someone else. Someone there loves you very much. He's a little shy, so he wanted me to ask you this question. You don't have to say yes if you don't want to, but Jordan wants to know if you'll marry him." Background behind Sean Astin. Squee. Jordan says, "Well." Abby says, "Gasp, of course." Laughing, "Of course." Sean Astin says, "She said yes, all right, congratulations, Abby, both of you, and best of luck in the future." This is a transcript from a recording that was made that day, which I would love to see it. I would love to see it. 2 days later, Abby announced on the Prancing Pony message board that because nobody had showed up to the festival, they had not raised any money. So now, Bit of Earth was in a little financial trouble. They owed around $2,500 for the festival permits and equipment. Through a combination of crowdfunding and asking friends and family, they did manage to raise the money, apologized profusely, and promised to be more financially responsible in the future. They would not be. Some of the bands involved responded to this whole debacle, saying that the communication from Bit of Earth had been extremely lacking and last minute regarding the scheduling. Some of the bands who were on the schedule had showed up on the day of the festival, yes, but others who were on the schedule had never heard of the festival. So it likely would have been a massive disaster even if they had had the proper permits on the first day. Next event! September 20th. Lost Palantir Film Festival. The Lost Palantir Film Festival was to be a showcase of amateur fantasy films that paid homage to Tolkien in some kind of way, which that's a pretty cool event. I'd go to that event. Bit of Earth booked a 700-seat theater for this event, the same theater where Sean Astin had hosted the screening of The Two Towers before Project Eleanor. And this time they even hired a professional PR person. What could possibly go wrong? Much in the same way as they had fixated on Elijah Wood hosting their previous event, this time they fixated on Billy Boyd as their ideal MC. Jordan assigned a Bit of Earth member by the username of HeadDesk to crowdfund for his airfare. She excitedly started posting the news that he was confirmed to attend the festival. One user donated a whole $500 in contribution to his ticket. HeadDesk then took the news to the forums of Billy Boyd's own website and started asking for donations there. Her posts were deleted by the webmaster, and she was informed that he was in fact not confirmed to attend the festival. He had been considering it. Yes, he had not told them a solid no, but his webmaster and 2 agents were appalled by the disorganization, the misinformation, false advertising, the public crowdfunding for his airfare, and due to this debacle, Billy Boyd had to back out of the event. HeadDesk became a scapegoat, much in the same way that Miss Tree had been a scapegoat for the failure of Hall of Fire, and also like Miss Tree, she found her posts giving her side of the story deleted from the message board. The professional PR woman they'd hired also pulled out of the event due to this clusterfuck. No one on Billy Boyd's team would respond to Bit of Earth's messages anymore. So in a desperate last resort, they reached out to Sean Astin to speak to him on their behalf. Astin assured Boyd that while Bit of Earth was a little disorganized, perhaps a little off-putting at times, they were ultimately working towards a good cause, and Sean had worked with them himself numerous times. However, by this point, a few weeks had passed, and Billy Boyd's schedule was totally booked up, so he couldn't have hosted the festival even if he'd wanted to. However, Sean Astin agreed to help them out, as did Dominic Monaghan and Viggo Mortensen. All three of them had agreed to host the festival together. Entertainment Network was working on a documentary about celebrities and volunteer work, and this also seemed like a great opportunity for them to capture some of Sean Astin's work with Bit of Earth. Things were looking massively up all of a sudden. We've got 3 huge stars of the Lord of the Rings movies, and a film crew coming. It all crashed and burned just as quickly. A few days later, the much-anticipated Return of the King trailer was released, and suddenly all of the cast found their schedules booked solid with PR appearances, so they wouldn't be able to host the festival after all. At least not in person. 2 days before the festival, Bit of Earth flew one of their members named Sue to LA. She was to meet with the 3 actors to get their signatures on the winners' certificates and to record exclusive videos of them for the festival. Sean Astin had been very busy though, so he'd had to record his video himself and then leave the tape with his PR manager. So Sue's first stop on the trip was to go to Sean's PR manager, pick up his tape for the festival. She did that. She got it. She got the tape. Jordan then called her to inform her that Viggo Mortensen was in the studio doing voiceovers that day, so he wouldn't be able to meet her until the evening. She waited 6 hours until Jordan called again and informed her that actually Viggo was very tired now from a hard day at work, and he promised he would meet her at 11 a.m. sharp the next morning. Sue arrived at 11 a.m. the next morning. He never showed up to that meeting either. Time was running out. Her flight home was that night, so she was forced to move on to her next appointment, which was with Dominic Monaghan at his home. Sue called yet another cab at her own expense and headed toward the address Jordan supplied. Traffic was terrible. It came to a point where Sue had to choose between getting to Dom's house and making it to her flight. This was Saturday, September 20th, 2003, the day of the Lost Palantir Festival, and Sue was holding the video from Sean Astin in her hand. Missing her flight would mean missing the festival, and Sean's lovely gesture would end up a waste of time. The cabbie pulled an illegal U-turn and raced Sue to the airport. They pulled up with 11 minutes to get to her gate. She ran through LAX as though the very whips of Saruman were behind her. She made it back, and apparently Sean Astin's video was lovely and heartfelt, and people really enjoyed it. In an interview later, Sue said, "It was dumb, but I'd do it again. I had fun." Just straight vibing. If you were getting some stinky smelly vibes from this whole goose chase that she was on, yeah, Janine later confirmed there were no appointments with Viggo Mortensen or Dominic Monaghan. They probably had no idea that any of this was going on. Which leads me to my question. Where was Jordan sending Sue when she thought she was going to Dominic Monaghan's home? We'll never know, but Jesus. The absolute audacity to fly her out there. To do what? Jordan begged the PR woman who had quit to help them out at the last minute. She said, "About 2 days before Lost Palantir, Jordan asked if I would please write and distribute press releases stating there was still a chance for Billy's appearance, and they would have videos from Dom and Viggo. I tried to explain the futility of such an effort at that late date, but I ended up writing a release." I questioned Jordan about whether or not they had permission from the celebrities' press agents to publish a press release without their reviewing it for accuracy. Jordan said Mr. Boyd's agent laughed and just said, "So long as it's factual, we don't care what you write." I've been in marketing and PR for more than 12 years. I found that statement very hard to swallow. Obviously, it was a ruse to prevent me from forwarding content to the agents for review. Jordan also wanted me to change the PR contact name and info to my name. Not just no, hell no. So yeah, they had barely advertised this event beforehand. Probably because they never quite knew who their guests were going to be or in what capacity they were going to be contributing, video or in person or what. Despite the complete lack of promotion, Jordan claimed that 400 tickets had been sold in advance, which seems unlikely considering 63 people showed up to the event. There was something a little weird about the amateur films themselves, too. There was a very low-quality film on the playbill that had obviously been shot as an afterthought on some sort of web-quality streaming video camera, although it did have the requisite Lord of the Rings theme via the costumes. It had no real beginning, end, or plot, It looked, for all the world, like someone had turned their camera on at a fantasy convention, recorded the passersby, and then slapped on beginning and ending credits. A friend of one of the entrants, Thorin, visited the Lost Palantir webpage to see if her friend won anything. She had never seen Bit of Earth before, and was stunned to recognize the description of the aforementioned poor-quality movie as one that she had appeared in. This movie was simply a memento another friend had recorded on his camera phone. He posted it on his website just to share it with his friends in the video. Thorin decided to find out just how this film got submitted to Lost Palantir. She called Abby and Jordan, and got into what she described as an extremely bizarre hour-long phone call, which was the biggest display of an attempted fandom pissing contest. She said, "They were basically trying to impress me with what big-name fans they were. Even at the time, knowing nothing about them, there was lots of eye-rolling on my end. They were making such a big deal that they've seen the Lord of the Rings costumes, and I could ask them any questions about the costumes I wanted." We garnered the impression that Abby or Jordan had taken it off our website, or knew who had, and then proceeded to lie about it. Janine now takes the mic back. That made sense, because most of the entries for Lost Palantir came from the Bit of Earth household. Perhaps in a rare lapse of their typical self-absorption, Abby and Jordan realized that it might look a bit narcissistic if the film festival consisted mainly of their own entries. They probably culled this entry off the web to fill out the schedule a tad, and conveniently stacked the deck in their favor for the contest by selecting a film that was never intended to be of competitive quality. By this point, the 2 months of rent that Janine had paid for the bag enders was running out, and they decided to pack it up and move to LA to follow their Hollywood dreams, I suppose. Diamond asked Janine for a ride to the bank so that she could take out a loan to help finance their move. Diamond had just turned 21 and had no prior credit. She lived with her parents until she moved into the Bit of Earth headquarters in early 2003. She thought as a current Wells Fargo customer, she was eligible to take out a personal loan, but when we got to the bank, they explained that they were sorry, but based on her credit rating, they simply had to say no. Diamond was on the brink of tears. All the Hobbit kids were counting on that loan money to finance their apartment in Los Angeles. Each of them cashed out all of their savings and sold most of their stuff to afford this move. But they knew it wasn't enough. Apartments in LA are not cheap. I asked the Wells Fargo agent if Diamond could get the loan with a co-signer. I had no problem trusting Diamond. She was bright and worked hard. She helped support the Bit of Earth household on her paychecks for 8 months. She simply hadn't been out of her parents' home long enough to establish a credit rating. Wells Fargo was more than happy to lend the money, with my 20 years of immaculate credit on the second dotted line. This can only turn out amazingly, I'm sure. The kids spent their last night in town sleeping on my floor. As they drove away, I had a taste of what it might feel like when my own little sproggies leave the nest, a wistful mix of hope, loneliness, and even a little jealousy that my days of grand adventures were behind me. I was gonna miss those damn Hobbit kids. That's what you thought, Janine. That's what you thought. Just before the move, on October 1st, Jordan had walked into a social security office in Portland with a pretty quirky story. You see, he had been born in an Estacada pagan commune called Circle of Light, where they just didn't really believe in registering their children with authorities. He provided this documentation of his birth in the commune, along with some also handwritten medical records from the commune, where he had misspelled the word tetanus. He said, "Hey guys, I am just a humble pagan commune man, unregistered ever with the American government, but now I would like a social security number, please." And they said, "Nah, sweaty." He did, however, manage to get a driver's license with the names Jordan Gabriel Wood shoved between his legal birth name and surname, sort of like a bunch of middle names. So he did all of that, mostly in vain, and then the Hobbit kids packed it up and moved to LA to go follow their dreams, leaving Janine with a wistful tear in her eye. In mid-October, Janine was contacted by a detective by the name of Myers, who needed to question her about a missing person by the name of Amy Player. Amy Player's parents had received a really strange suicide note, and were desperately trying to find out what had happened to their child. This detective had reason to believe that the person formerly known as Amy was now living as Jordan Wood. Janine was completely shocked by this. She insisted to the detective that her friend was who he said he was. After the detective left, Janine called Jordan to get his side of the story. He explained that he had a vindictive ex-girlfriend by the live journal name of Versifile, who had been spreading this rumor that he was the same person as Amy Player, whose online name had been VB, or Victoria Bitter. VB was just some former friend of Abby's who bore a superficial resemblance to Jordan. But Versifile, can you believe, had hacked into the BOE website and linked to this ridiculous post with a bunch of edited photos of Jordan with, like, his head put onto a woman's body and all these things to supposedly prove that he was secretly VB. Later, however, Jordan and Abby told Janine the full, juicy version of the story, which is that VB/Amy was actually Abby's ex, and that Abby had broken up with her for Jordan. Janine was at a loss here. Jordan and Abby's story was crazy, and his resemblance to this missing person was uncanny. But also, he was her friend, who she trusted, and he certainly didn't behave like somebody on the run. He did charity work, he had tons of friends, he freely gave out his address and contact information, he was trying to be this kind of public figure in fandom. At first, confronted with this dilemma, Janine thought, it should be simple for Jordan to prove he is who he says he is, ignoring how completely undignified the suggestion is. I suppose there is technically an easy way to prove your gender assigned at birth. Jordan then reminded Janine that under no circumstances could he be taken into police custody, because if they ran his social security number through their system, the IRA would know because they monitor that system. What social security number, Jordan? What social security number? If Jordan was telling the truth, then turning himself in would get him killed. If Jordan was telling the truth and Myers busted him, then Myers would get him killed. If Jordan was telling the truth and I helped lead Myers to him, then I could get him killed. Of course, if Jordan was lying, then I was helping a criminal avoid the law. The law, capitalized. And not just any criminal. A criminal who still owed me $1,400. I had no way to tell one way or the other, and the wrong guess could result in either the death of my friend or the loss of my money. Both equally tragic consequences for Janine. So what the fuck? Well, Jordan sent that note to his parents around the exact same time in early October that he walked into that social security office trying to get a new social security number with the pagan commune documents. It was all part of this effort to erase the person that he had been before. To kill her, to have her legally classified as dead, and then legitimize his new identity as Jordan and as male. The whole note is published in Janine's book, so I'm going to read that to you. This is the story that he wanted told about his former self after she was gone. I know that I had held out hope for Abby to leave her husband for me, that I desired her, wanted her, but I don't know if I loved her. I don't know if I'm capable of love. If I'm not, I can swear to you that it is not for lack of receiving it. Whether I can love or not is not your fault. I've spent my whole life blaming others, but here in the cold and useless light of hindsight, I see the only hands that have woven this bitter noose were my own. Love or no, I can feel jealousy, and that I did feel to a despairing degree when she proved not to love me in any way but platonic. I bitterly resented first Bob, then Jordan, whom she loved even more deeply, and whose love from her I so envied that it drove me into what was at last my undoing. I don't know if Jordan's writing style is my favorite, but it is certainly very emotional. It is very good at playing on emotions, and I can understand a little bit of why he was such a good manipulator. At first, I just claimed Jordan's glories as my own. Young and wealthy, he came to us from Los Angeles, with rings connections dripping from him, and a cell phone choked with agents whom he knew by their first names. He made Bit of Earth a fandom force to be reckoned with within weeks, swept Abby off her feet, and I hated him for both. I began to go farther, not just claiming his glory in a few private phone calls, but taking advantage of the androgynous nature of the monkeyer to steal for myself. I started using it at work, then eventually started trying to pass as a boy, persuading the DMV to put his name in with mine on my ID, which let me get a Sears card in his name. The BOE staff knew about some of the cross-dressing, but thought it was a lesbian thing. They knew nothing of my usurpment of Jordan's identity, nor the thrill it gave. I felt surged with borrowed power, the disguise of life afresh. I held his reputation like a warrior wearing an enemy's skin, and the card gave me yet another level of protection and freedom. I even once tried to use his name online, that blissful place where identities are as sweetly fluid as free Hotmail accounts. But I've dipped too many times into that well, and this February, the water proved poisoned. Once again, though I had a temporary reprieve convincing Abby to leave LiveJournal and much of social fandom because a bad ex was spreading ridiculous rumors about us. It was my luck she believed me and walked out without a second look, and thus never noticed I'd been attempting to cover my ass by posting in her name as well to back up my stories. In the end, I had to leave the internet entirely, scattering in my wake the now most bitter ironic rumor of suicide. So in this story, Jordan was a real, separate person from VB. VB had been intensely jealous of him, all of his talent and prestigious connections, and on top of all of that, he'd stolen her girlfriend. She'd started impersonating him, but it hadn't turned out very well, and she'd had to recede into the shadows, leaving behind rumors that she was dead, which Abby didn't know about, despite supposedly being very close with both VB and the real Jordan. Abby had also backed up the story that VB was dead, but that was VB posting on her account to back up the fake story, And again, Abby didn't know about this, so there was an impersonation phase where VB had been pretending to be Jordan. But now that was over, and it was just the real Jordan, who was real and separate from VB, and VB was now actually dead. Okay, you might be thinking, well, this seems like quite the complicated scheme when you can just legally change your name and gender. Well, he was a dramatic weirdo. He was a born schemer. A really interesting insight into his psyche, I think, is something that he wrote in the note to his parents regarding him failing out of school. There was no thrill in study, in writing papers, in going to class. An A earned the same way as everyone else's held bland disinterest at best. But an A I had cheated or talked my way into, the more intrigue and intricacy the better, was the headiest brew. No legally changing your name, that's too easy. Only pagan commune scheme. Abby wrote, I really believed Amy had quote-unquote died. That was the only thing that got me to participate. I let myself be convinced that it would be more unkind for Amy's parents to live with someone impersonating their daughter. Only pagan commune scheme, and tell your girlfriend that your soul had died and been replaced by Elijah Wood. Okay, I know my audience is all queer people. I feel like I don't have to explain that this does not reflect on a single other trans person, but let me say it. Andy was, and is, a compulsive liar obsessed with attention and control. He was literally trying to build a cult around his faked psychic abilities. And yes, him also being trans is inextricable from those things in his story. And yes, many of his critics have used him as a reason to demean trans identity. But that is also extremely shitty. We are all going to be mature about this story, okay? Because of Detective Myers' investigation, Jordan then emailed his parents, not as their missing child, but as Bit of Earth, the organization that Jordan, the real Jordan who was not their child, was a part of. I am writing to inform you of an unfortunate development with our staff. Bob, our former head of security, has been fired tonight for attempted blackmail. He is an extremely untrustworthy individual who was trying to make a second chance through Bit of Earth. He has threatened to contact you with allegations, the precise nature of which we do not know, but which concern the disappearance of your daughter Amy. Our director of celebrity relations, Jordan Wood, is the young man who was involved in Amy's identity theft, as well as the main target of Bob's attack. There have been threats of telling you that Jordan is your missing daughter and are the same person, and that is not only untrue, but directly intended to place Jordan in danger. Jordan is fleeing an extremely dangerous and abusive home situation, and to have him exposed to the police prematurely, he is preparing testimony, would put him at extreme risk from those associated with his family. They were involved in criminal activities in which he refused to participate. We would ask that you please do not allow this man to use your grief to endanger an innocent youth. We know that with your daughter's history of falsehood, it might be difficult to trust people, and we are not asking you to do so blindly. We are willing to provide, if necessary, notarized statements from myself, Diamond's real name, and Dr. Janine Renee, MD, PhD. That is true, by the way, this woman was a doctor. Supporting Jordan's identity sympathies. Signed, Abigail Stone, and the staff of Bit of Earth. Janine writes, aside from being very displeased at being used as a character reference without my permission, I didn't know what to make of this news. Bob had been their roommate since the 2002 line party and participated in many Bit of Earth events. He certainly seemed okay to me. Also, regarding Bob, I'm not sure if Bob ever knew that Jordan wrote that, or if they reconciled afterwards, or what. I know Jordan told Janine that they reconciled afterwards, but you would think that would be a difficult thing to reconcile, writing that kind of thing about your friend for no reason. Anyway, Janine sent Jordan back a stern email explaining that she was not comfortable being a character reference in this. She said, Jordan, I don't know your identity. In short, if Amy's parents had contacted me, I would have to tell them I wasn't sure if you were their daughter or not. And for you to claim that I would fully support your story was presumptuous and incorrect, and a bit manipulative as well. Just a little bit, perhaps. Even Sean Astin ended up being questioned by Myers about Jordan's identity and Bit of Earth. In a public statement about Bit of Earth, Sean Astin later said, I was approached on September 11th, 2002, to ask me if I wanted to be a part of this thing. I was a little nervous about the level of intensity in their fandom, but I recognized in them a kind of leadership capacity. I wanted to support and nurture in a small, limited way, because there was a lot of emotional dysfunction in their group. I didn't want to deny the energy that was being directed towards me. I wanted to help shape their imaginations for a moment, and hopefully inspire them to use that passion in service. Oh god, what a genuinely delightful man. He did not deserve to be drawn into this. By the end of the month, Jordan had confessed to Myers that he was the same person who had been known as Amy. When Janine found out, she was livid that she had been manipulated. She was even more livid when Myers explained to her that there weren't going to be any legal consequences for Jordan. Yes, he had attempted to change his identity in a dubious manner. However, the DA wasn't going to extradite him from California over that. He had no criminal record, he was living an honest life, doing charity work. Overall, not really worth the trouble of prosecuting. Janine, Sue, and other BOE members who were close to the situation urged Jordan to make a public statement to the community about this. They thought that everyone deserved to know, but they didn't want to be the ones to out him. However, Jordan doubled down on his story. He told them that Myers had forced him to confess and that he had done so rather than get deeply involved with the legal system and be tracked down by the IRA. Janine remained a member of Bit of Earth, but she knew that something was not right with Jordan, and she, in her own words, set out to establish some boundaries. If the detective really has cleared the name of Amy Player, then it would seem reasonable if you were Amy to just accept your identity back. Of course, there are a lot of unhealthy/manipulative possibilities for sticking to a story that is not true. Perhaps Abby is dead set against being identified as a lesbian. Perhaps, Amy Player, you did some more major crimes that would get you thrown in jail if Detective Myers kept this case open longer and discovered them. Or you could just be saving face, refusing to let yourself be caught in a lie. Or maybe you really are a girl, but not Amy Player, or a guy, but not really Elijah Wood's cousin, and or not really being pursued by the IRA. And you don't want to admit those stories are phony. It boggles my mind how many possibilities there are. I'll just tell you, Jordan, I don't really care who you are, whether you're a dyke. I'm allowed to say that, but Janine probably shouldn't. If you have been pulling my leg, now is the time to tell me. Actually, a while ago was the optimal time to tell me, but this has come to a point of no return. I don't like to give ultimata, but in this case, I'm going to make an exception. If you stick to this story after this email, and I determine it is a lie, that will be the end of my friendship with you and Abby. All of this happened just as the hype was ramping up for Tentmoot 2003, Bit of Earth's magnum opus thus far. The name Tentmoot is taken from Entmoot, the gathering of Ents in Tolkien's books. Tentmoot was projected to host 4,000 to 10,000 people at the Portland Convention Center for 5 days, making it the largest Lord of the Rings convention in American history. Bob wrote, "The convention center quoted us $13,344.54 and gave us a 45% discount on account of them being a charity, making it $9,203.13. Obviously, I knew this wasn't going to work, but I brought it to Jordan and got no problem. The ticket sales alone will cover it." And he okayed the expense. They were going to have all kinds of amazing Lord of the Rings themed activities, and BOE members put real work into planning this thing. Diamond had experience working in cafes, so she was planning the White Tower Cafe. She made a whole menu for it. Bit of Earth quickly began sending out invites to Lord of the Rings cast members, claiming that Bit of Earth was a registered non-profit associated with various charities such as Reading is Fundamental. The handling of the celebrity invites overall was it was a mess. They had a few repeats of the situation with Billy Boyd, where they took a maybe as a confirmed yes, then got in trouble for false advertising, and the actor had to say no due to the controversy. When they received no answer from David Sallow, the linguistic consultant who later debunked Jordan's pseudo-Westron, they ended up calling his wife at her work. They did not know how to take no for an answer. Their endeavors were a combination of just godlike audacity and zero manners whatsoever. The cast and crew members they did get to agree to come to Tentmoot were by no means big names. Only hardcore Lord of the Rings fans would really consider these people like big fancy celebrities. There was an extra named Brett McKenzie who appeared in the background of a few scenes. The fandom named him Figwit, which is an acronym for Frodo is great. But who is that? Yeah, they got that guy to come to Tentmoot. He was in a band apparently. It was called the Black Seeds, so they got them to come play. It would have been their first show in the United States and a really good opportunity for them. What it meant for Bit of Earth was flying out 9 people and all of their equipment. Bob wrote, "I objected vigorously to this band. I argued that if we were going to have a group come that featured Brett McKenzie, we should try for Flight of the Conchords," which was a comedy group that he was in apparently. They were funny, and as a bonus, there were only 2 of them, as opposed to 9. But Jordan assured me that the Conchords were no longer performing. Not only did I learn that this wasn't true, but they eventually became huge hits here in America. Hot Figwit and his band of 9 people eventually got tired of the terrible communication and lack of commitment from Bit of Earth, and they backed out of attending Tentmoot. 2 Bit of Earth members, named John and Talisha, were planning to get married at the convention. So Bit of Earth, of course, arranged for Kieran Shaw, the stunt double for all 5 of the Hobbits, to officiate the wedding. Janine wanted no part in the behind the scenes of Tentmoot, feeling that she had already served her time. However, on December 2nd, she received a call from Jordan. Jordan told her, "We'd gotten everything arranged months ago with Air New Zealand for free airline tickets. They have this program where they give 20 free tickets away each month to charity. They first give them to people who need to fly for organ transplants, and if there are any left over, they pass those out first come, first serve. They had 14 tickets left over for December, so they gave them to us. Well, after the world premiere of Return of the King in Wellington, tourism to New Zealand has skyrocketed, so someone high up decided that they weren't going to give out so many free tickets when business was going so good. And when I called them to make the final arrangements, suddenly they tell me we can't have the tickets?" Janine said, "What the hell? They waited till now to let you know?" Jordan said, "Someone was supposed to call me 3 weeks ago, but apparently they never got around to it. I just found out about it today." Meanwhile, Jordan was also emailing New Zealand Air, begging them for free tickets at the last moment, begging them for a miracle to save their convention. You see, Bit of Earth had secured the money for the tickets through a private donation from a local businesswoman, but her husband had recently filed for divorce and all of her assets had been frozen, so they no longer had that donation. So please, New Zealand Air, it's up to you to save us. Our organization has had such a profound emotional impact on the lives of Lord of the Rings fans everywhere. Our fate is in your hands." They said no. There were 2 weeks until the convention. 14 tickets from New Zealand to LA was going to cost $70,000, and that was just to get the actors to LA. They were then going to need a connecting domestic flight to Portland for the convention. Bit of Earth did not have $70,000. What did they have in the meantime, if not $70,000 in liquid funds? A community of ride or die fans. And good news! The travel agency agreed to accept the payment on multiple credit cards. Figwit's band had cancelled, so that meant 9 less airfares than they had originally thought. The remaining ones were repriced by the travel agency at only $19,000. The travel agent informed Janine that we needed to make a decision about the international tickets now, because they couldn't be purchased at all if we waited too much longer. It was getting too close to departure time. Holy smoke! It was already December 10th, 2003 in New Zealand. The Kiwis had to leave that night in order to be in Portland when Tent Moot opened on the 11th. I knew Jordan didn't have any other credit cards yet. It all came down to me. If I didn't pay right then there would be no celebrities and no Tent Moot. I asked myself, what's the use of having 2 platinum MasterCards if you're never going to use them? She paid for the tickets from New Zealand to LAX, and then sent out this email to her fellow Bit of Earth staff. Okay, I just put $15,000 on my 2 cards to pay for all the international travel. We still have to buy all the domestic travel. My cards are now maxed out, and I mean not 1 penny more. I've really truly 100% put my ass on the line, Jordan, and I'm not a happy camper either. I need the rest of the credit cards ASAP, along with full name, billing address, and expiry date on each card to get the domestic stuff arranged. Abby then contacted various other members in their community, asking them for their credit card information and telling them that those cards would be held, quote unquote, as a backup, that their cards would not be charged, which was a lie. They were fully gonna charge those cards to the limit the way that Janine had done with hers. Abby wrote, "I hate using the phone, and the idea of calling everyone I knew to beg for their credit card numbers was humiliating and hideous. I don't remember all the people I called. I know he made me call my mother and father, despite my correct protestations that they would never, ever, ever help us in this. He made me call any friends I could think of, plus I had a list of people who had worked with Bit of Earth previously to pester. I was horrified, but I obeyed. That afternoon is a literal blur of panic and shame. Between calls, Andy was alternately reassuring and threatening me that everything hung on my shoulders at that moment." Janine suspects that this was a setup to blame her for charging the cards later, to make her into the scapegoat, just as they had done to other Bit of Earth members during previous disasters. Another Bit of Earth member, Zinnia, I think I mentioned her once before, she was becoming extremely suspicious about the amount of last-minute crises they were constantly dealing with every time they tried to do anything. She emailed Air New Zealand to try and confirm Jordan's story. After her illuminating conversation with them, she told Janine, "I just spoke on the phone with Jenny Simpson, the director of sponsorships at Air New Zealand. They have never heard of Tentmoot or bitofearth.net. They directed me to speak with Rebecca Weaver, who is their LA office and is handling Lord of the Rings related events. She also has never heard of the convention or Bit of Earth, and finds it highly unlikely that they would have agreed to such a thing, because she has people calling and begging for tickets all the time. They have no such program as the one which Jordan describes, where they give away a certain quota to charity each month. They said this sounds to them to be an elaborate scam." Based on this single email, my entire perception of Bit of Earth and Jordan, extending all the way back to Project Eleanor, exploded. Janine confronted Jordan and demanded the truth. She said that if he was going to maintain that he was telling the truth this time, he had to prove it. He had to find the name of the person who had told him about this non-existent ticket donation program, and to call her back in 30 minutes with proof that he really had been acting in good faith. 30 minutes passed, and Janine ended up calling him back herself. The phone was answered by little Sam, who told her that Jordan was locked in the bathroom vomiting. Bit of Earth now had 2 hours before the actors were to depart on their flights. Janine quickly called the travel agency back, told them to cancel the tickets, and that she had been conned. However, they had no way to contact the Lord of the Rings cast members themselves because Jordan always kept all of their contact information to himself. Abby wrote, "I don't remember who shook me awake, but Diamond or little Sam were frantic. Andy had locked himself in the bathroom. They'd pried the door open with a screwdriver. That was when I got there. And there on the floor was Andy, apparently unconscious, next to a pool of vomit that was mostly made up of pills. There was a note. It said that Janine had canceled the airline tickets, Tentmoot had fallen apart, and he was sorry. Someone had already called 911. I was beyond destroyed. We went to the hospital after the ambulance took Andy away, as he fought and begged the EMTs not to take him. I remember seeing him in that hospital bed, pitiful and sad-eyed with charcoal residue around his mouth. They'd pumped his stomach in case he had taken more pills than he had admitted to. They said they were going to put him in a facility for mandatory 48-hour lockup. I was allowed to be there when they checked him into the facility, and I remember taking great pains to ensure that he was treated respectfully in regards to his gender." Abby called Janine from a hospital payphone and informed her that Jordan had attempted to commit suicide. Tentmoot was officially cancelled. Bob informed all of the bands and volunteers not to show up. Of course, with Andy in the hospital for 48 hours, it was entirely on Diamond's and my shoulders to deal with the fallout. I remember many phone calls and emails to everyone, all of whom were furious. Resignations from nearly every single person who had worked with Bit of Earth filled my inbox. Bob was enraged, Janine was interrogating us and sending documentation proving that there had never been a donation. Seeing proof that Andy had lied was the worst of all. It shook all three of us to the core. In retrospect, it was a completely transparent move on Andy's part. He was undoubtedly feigning unconsciousness. She also observed that the pills were completely intact, meaning that he had thrown up almost immediately, and among them were substances not likely to be fatal, including multivitamins. In the hospital, Jordan once again doubled down on his story to Abby. He told her there really had been an initial donation that had fallen through, and that none of this was his fault. Meanwhile, there was one very big problem coming for all of them. 3 of the 4 actors that Janine had bought plane tickets for had made it onto that plane after all, and they had no idea the convention was cancelled. Apparently this was able to happen because it was something about the type of tickets that Janine had bought. They were technically vouchers that could be used at any time, so she had bought these vouchers and then made a reservation for them on that flight. She had been able to cancel those reservations, but technically the vouchers were still good. But New Zealand Air still partially at fault because they had 4 canceled reservations. They stopped 1 person from flying on a canceled reservation, and they let the other 3 go. The 3 cast members on the plane were Jed Brophy, who played a number of minor roles in the films, Paul Randall, nicknamed Tall Paul, who was one of the size doubles used to make hobbits look smaller, Brian Sargent, who played a minor hobbit role that is apparently edited out of all but special editions of the film. Oh yeah, and they forgot about Kieran Shaw's plane ticket, by the way. He was informed that his plane tickets would never arrive and that the festival was cancelled on the supposed day of the festival, and I presume so were the people whose wedding he was supposed to officiate. Jesus Christ. So Brian, Jed, and Paul were now stranded at LAX looking for a connecting flight to Portland that did not exist. Abby did the only thing she could think to do, which was pick them up in her sketchy van and take them for dinner in touristy Santa Monica. What I remember most, though, is that all 3 of them were very kind. Jed was the nicest. He was very gregarious, curious about Bit of Earth and what we'd done before, and generally tried hard to make the best of a bad situation. Paul was much more quiet. He seemed very shy and uncertain about what was going on. Brian was almost as chatty as Jed, though I remember he was not as warm, and was a lot less reticent about his annoyance with the whole situation. I wish I remembered more of that dinner, because we did talk quite a bit, but what I remember was how hard it was to hold myself together as I explained how very poor we were, and that we could not get them hotel rooms, and that their only option was to come stay in our apartment. Brian thankfully had a relative in LA that he could stay with, but Jed and Paul did in fact stay a night in the Bag Ender apartment. Before they arrived, Diamond frantically cleaned the entire place and apparently did a very good job. She set up a camping mattress in the living room, made sure they had towels, spent the last of their money on groceries. Janine, in her book, obviously makes a big stink about how sketchy and inhumane it was to make famous people sleep on their floor. But reading Abby's side of the story, It kind of just makes me sad and secondhand embarrassed. At the house, everyone was introduced around. It was fairly late in the day, so we weren't up that long. We showed the actors their rooms, and then we sat around in the living room and talked for a while. I wish I could remember that conversation too. Jed told so many stories while Paul was very quiet. I know that Paul kept giving Andy strange looks. Andy later swore it was because Paul somehow knew that Andy was secretly Elijah Wood. The next morning, somebody made breakfast. I remember eggs. Little Sam remembers Nutella on toast. I remember an awkward phone call with Janine, who was hoping the guys would speak at her alma mater as a way of making their visit more purposeful. I'm sure that idea was not tempting, considering Abby had told them that Janine was at fault for the whole clusterfuck. Janine also explained the whole ticket situation to them over the phone, but asked them not to use their return trip as it would cost her money. They used the return trips anyway. Abby and Diamond took them sightseeing around Hollywood before dropping them off at the airport. Bit of Earth completely collapsed after this. As Abby has already told us, pretty much every member resigned. It was a whole giant mess. On all fronts. Almost all fronts. Janine noticed one critical aspect lacking here. There was no outrage from the public. One would expect the message board to be flooded with angry messages from ticket holders to a convention that no longer existed. Jordan had reported 800 advance ticket sales. The real number was 28. Della really arranged for a few TV and radio stations to come to Tent Moot and do promotions. Despite receiving the press releases at the 11th hour, Lawrence, Jed, and Kieran cooked up a wonderful plan to perform a mock fight and then teach a workshop about doing the stunts from their demonstration. Bob really set up bands to play, but that was it. There was no shopping, no workshops, no panels, and no customers. Tent Moot had been doomed long before. And Bob and Sue had known about these dismal ticket sales. In fact, Sue had apparently been begging Jordan to cancel the convention for months. Bob wrote, "I knew for a fact that Tent Moot had not fallen apart, as it was never together. This was an event that was never going to happen, and there was no way it could have. At best, it would have lasted an hour before we got booted from the convention center." Bob left Bit of Earth and the Bagenders household immediately after Tent Moot. He had originally flown to Portland to oversee the convention, but ultimately he was too disgusted by Jordan's actions to ever return. According to Abby, Jordan then trashed Bob's room and peed on the mattress to make it look like Bob was this terrible, spiteful person who had abandoned them. Bob wrote, "I still count myself remarkably lucky that I was never drawn into the really deep psychological disturbing stuff. But after I left our place in San Dimas, I was filled with rage, regret, sadness, and almost every emotion I'd felt up until that point. I never really made a big deal out of it, but all of the going down of that shit I was privy to happened in the 6 months after my dad's death. I was willing to forgive all for my friends until that stupid staged suicide attempt. That was the thing that pushed me over the edge. I remember being on the way up to Portland and starting work on prepping the convention center for Tent Moot, which I knew had sold jack all for tickets and that it was going to be a flop, but fuck it if it was going to be a flop because of me. Landing in SFO for a layover, calling, hearing that everything was okay, and moving forward as planned, getting on a plane to Portland, and then calling again to hear of the suicide attempt. I don't take suicide lightly. My dad went that way. I'd tried going that way several times. I don't think of it as a joke or something to play at. Little Sam's mother also arrived to remove her from the Bit of Earth household soon after Tent Moot. Little Sam believes that this is because Janine contacted her mother and informed her how messed up things were getting. Janine was on a mission to take them down and to debunk all of their lies from the past year. She called Reading as Fundamentals Donor Relations Department and discovered that they had never had this legitimate partnership with Bit of Earth that Bit of Earth had presented on their website, and of course advertised their events with. Bit of Earth had reached out before Project Eleanor to try and set something up with them, but somebody from Reading is Fundamental had visited Bit of Earth's website, as you might do, and found it to be filled with raunchy hobbit sex fanfiction. They also had no record of ever receiving a donation from Bit of Earth. They never donated any money. But that's because they never had any money. They certainly never profited. Trying to set up all of these elaborate events had a lot of costs involved, and they really did pay for some things, which is what makes this such a weird scam. No one benefits. Janine reported all of Bit of Earth's doings to Detective Myers. Myers was concerned and informed Janine to contact him immediately if she became aware of Jordan's whereabouts again. Well, Janine knew that Abby and Jordan were going to be returning to Portland for the Return of the King premiere and to return some belongings to their now former roommate Bob. Bob then called Janine as soon as Jordan showed up at his house. And here's the real kicker. The cops were already there, or a cop was already there. Jordan had called them himself, claiming that Bob was dangerous and violent and that he feared for his safety, which was obviously some kind of tactic to intimidate Bob. So Bob and Janine on the phone with him were able to take the cop aside and convince him to page Myers. Myers confirmed to that cop that he was in fact looking for Jordan. Janine listened in pure rapture as Bob described Jordan's arrest to her over the phone. Look at his sad little mugshot. Look at his sad little mugshot in there. But what was the crime? What was the crime here? What was Myers possibly gonna figure out to charge him with? Insert small essay about questionable police practices here. The only thing that Myers could think to charge him with was identity theft, because he had claimed in his letter to his parents that he had stolen the identity of the real Jordan, even though it seemed highly unlikely that there was a real Jordan. But Myers charged him with identity theft and kept him in jail for 9 hours. To the dismay of his former friends, he did make it out of jail in time to attend the Return of the King premiere that night. But that would be his last public appearance in Lord of the Rings fandom. He stopped paying the web hosting fees for bitofearth.net, and it very quickly perished. Abby, Jordan, and Diamond remained living in LA, but in January of 2004, Abby and Jordan once again drove up to Portland, this time for his arraignment for identity theft. Janine and some of her friends from Bit of Earth planned Arraign Moot, which was their party in the courthouse parking lot intended to shame Jordan and Abby. Unfortunately for them, though, the arraignment did not happen. The DA chose to formally ignore the charges on the basis that Jordan was a first-time offender, plus he now lived in LA, no longer really making him their problem or worth their effort to bring him back, etc. But Janine was still desperate to see them face some kind of legal consequence. She went to the Department of Justice and explained the whole story of Bit of Earth. She managed to get Jordan and Abby fined $500 and banned from soliciting donations in the state of Oregon, which is not much. But Janine was in for another pleasant surprise very soon. Because remember how Jordan and Abby had returned a bunch of Bob's things to him in late 2003? Among those things was a computer which Jordan and Abby had been using, and when Bob finally booted it up, he realized that they had never logged out of their accounts, the official Tentmoot and Bit of Earth accounts, thus giving him access to all of the email evidence of their lies. The disorganization, the terrible communication, the different lies told to different people, fighting with people's agents, everyone getting mad at them for false advertising and made-up celebrity appearances, etc., etc. It was all in the emails. Also, remember how Janine co-signed that loan? Yeah, it wasn't getting paid. When Janine confronted Diamond about this, Diamond told her that Jordan was in charge of all of the household finances, that she turned her paychecks over to him. Janine then called the police on them, which did successfully intimidate Diamond into setting up some payments with the bank. Just to be sure though, Janine then sent her these extremely abusive reminders every month to make sure that she paid the loan. I am going to hound you all I want until you prove to me that you are capable of paying the money that you agreed to pay. And it's not harassment, it's business. Get it? You Welch alone. I have the right to make sure you're not ripping me off, period. You go on back to your little world of denial, just pull your head out of it long enough to make that loan payment, which, by the way, is due at the end of the month. I will call Wells Fargo before I leave LA. If they have no record of receiving a payment from you by then, I will be coming to visit you, to extract cash from you to pay the debt that you owe. And after that snippy letter, I may just come to name of Diamond's workplace as a customer and force you to wait on me. If you don't want me to do that, then pay your bills on time. It's that simple. And don't get snotty with me anymore, young lady. You're out of your league. Every time you watch the Lord of the Rings movies, you can bask in the delight of knowing everyone you see on screen despises you. Boy, I hope the friendship with Miss Jordan and Abby is worth all that. Pay your Wells Fargo bill. Do you understand that you are now officially white trash? Are you prostituting yourself yet? Addicted to crack? Got AIDS? So much to look forward to. You will never be able to buy a new car or house or get a credit card. In short, you're going to end up with nothing but filth, squalor, and secondhand garbage. Yeah, she published this in her own book. She thinks this shit makes her look good. Jordan and Abby were now infamous villains in their fandom, and Janine was the #1 source of gossip about them. In addition to writing the book, She continued to document their every move on her live journal. She knew that they were now working as characters on Hollywood Boulevard. Abby portrayed Fiona from Shrek, and Jordan did a few, including Legolas, Puss in Boots, and Harry Potter. Abby wrote, back when she was doing her press tour, a handful of author signings at privately owned bookstores, and a few Lord of the Rings conventions, she took the trouble of coming to hunt us down on Hollywood Boulevard. She waved the book around and yelled and screamed and generally made a big noise, then went away. But between that and the online stalking, I've been terribly intimidated. I think I would have gotten out of that fucked up situation a lot sooner if she hadn't been so vengeful. She also wrote, now speaking directly to Janine, once we were in Hollywood, you gloried in reporting that we were begging. We were, not conning strangers for money or thrills, but pretending that we were stranded without gas so that we could buy enough to eat. For a few weeks, we lived on produce we picked in the neighborhood in San Dimas. To this day, oranges taste like hunger to me. You have unquestionably got your money's worth in suffering. You drove us to the streets. You personally ensured we were homeless. You openly said you hoped we would be forced into prostitution. Meanwhile, in the privacy of their home, Jordan's control over Abby and Diamond was only tightening. Diamond was now privy to the full extent of Jordan's powers and channeling abilities. The biggest thing that separated her and Abby's experiences now was that Diamond still had her day job, so she got to escape from Jordan's influence during the day, whereas Abby was subjected to it 24/7. Jordan told Abby that she had DID, dissociative identity disorder, that different facets of her personality, almost different moods, were her alters, which is not how DID works at all, and that sometimes Abby's alters had done or said things that she didn't remember, which is a terrifying thing to convince someone of as a manipulation tactic. Abby began having panic attacks. Jordan told her that she was possessed by secular demons, whatever the hell that means, and began giving her exorcisms. In the midst of all of this, he once again did a little rebranding. Abby wrote, Jordan committed suicide the same way Amy had previously, specifically to punish Diamond, and Andy came. That is, now he was the duplicate soul of Orlando Bloom. The Elijah Wood soul that had inhabited his body, or the duplicate soul of Elijah Wood, had gone by Jordan. Now he was inhabited by the duplicate soul of Orlando Bloom, who went by Andy. Normal stuff. Diamond wrote, neither Abby nor I have any idea what happened, but I said or did something to make Elijah/Jordan go away. He said he was going to be like Amy, dead, so Andy came to fill the space to keep the body alive. I was made to believe that I was killing my friend, and my other friend's fiancé. I know Abby felt that anguish too, which made me sink deeper and deeper into the lies, and the guilt. Oh, the guilt. After that, I really felt like I had to be good, to do what I was told, don't cause any trouble, because Elijah wasn't gone yet, so I might be able to get him to come back, and I had to write to him every day in a journal and beg for his forgiveness and plead with him to come back. Abby wrote, there was a lot of retconning. It was Amy who was a liar. Jordan, who was a different person entirely, was being honest. Later, when he did another core switch, it became Jordan who was incompetent and bad and screwed things up. Andy, who was a different person entirely, was being honest. Eventually, the bonds between the three roommates began to fall apart. Abby and Diamond are still private about some of the most personal aspects of their lives at this point, which is fully their right. But Abby does say that she was turned against Diamond, and that this seems partially to have been due to Jordan trying to manipulate it into some kind of love triangle. She wrote, the bottom line is that since the others were not the same person as Andy, they could have a relationship with other people, so it wasn't any of my business what he and Diamond were doing. It wasn't my boyfriend who was seducing another woman. This took a really drastic turn when Jordan died and Andy became the core, because that time Andy was not in a romantic relationship with me. I think the jealousy was the death knell. To her relationship with Diamond, she means. Although there was plenty of other stuff. Diamond wrote, I was being pushed to deal with my sexuality or lack thereof. I was starting to hate my virginity. I was also made very, very conscious of how I sat, dressed, presented myself. I was told that since my parents gave me no sex ed, seriously, the talk was don't have sex, it's bad. I longed out of shame to have a carnal relationship. I was encouraged to start exploring, both by myself and with Pippin's help and guidance. Obviously, through Jordan's channeling. God, I hate writing this, but I want people to know the truth. As shameful as it is, if this helps just one person, my discomfort in reliving this will be worth it. Diamond also says that she began having, in her words, really horrific episodes of some sort. Do I know what to call them? No, I don't. I'll be honest, there's a lot of haze surrounding the memories at that time. Emotions and stress levels were high, food and sleep levels were extremely low. She says that she bit Andy once. He would threaten to call mental health services on her. She would agree that she needed help, and then he would immediately revoke that. Because can you imagine if she actually got help and told people what was going on. Abby says that Diamond was eventually forced to leave by Andy. I imagine because her mental health situation was so dire that he could no longer control her. Abby wrote, after Diamond left, or rather was forced to leave by Andy, there were many, many more quests. I became involved in a war among the gods because I might be a Maiar like Gandalf, trapped in a human body. Later it turned out that Gandalf was really Satan, the actual devil himself, and that most of the things I'd been involved with weren't real after all. Whatever, okay, my god. Andy later introduced a whole other cast of others who were they were like teenage soldiers in World War II from an alternate timeline. This was originally based off of the Narnia books, I believe. It was later adapted into his very iconic Harry Potter fanfiction, which will probably be the subject of a future video. At this time, he also legally changed his name to Andrew Michael Blake. All of this was happening behind closed doors. After the combustion of Tentmoot in December of 2003, Andy really disappeared from the public eye. However, Abby lived with him, enduring extreme psychological abuse for 3 more years. By February of 2007, Andy's lore was starting to dip into conspiracy theory territory. He and Abby were being watched by agents, spies, they were being pursued by the government. George Bush himself is going to pop out from behind that dumpster any minute. Jordan convinced Abby that they needed to flee the country and that they had an opportunity to start a new life in Toronto. All they had to do was make it to the Canadian border to seek political asylum. Yes, seriously. They planned to walk from the Buffalo airport to the Canadian border. Abby wrote, funny thing is, there was nothing stopping us from getting passports and visas. There was no reason we couldn't leave the country. I even had a valid passport and Jordan had a perfectly legal ID. But no, that's not possible. The man might find out. An A earned in the same way as everyone else's, etc., etc. It's too boring. They landed in Buffalo in the middle of a record-breaking blizzard with only 3 suitcases and Abby's pet sparrow. We walked the frozen streets of Buffalo for hours, dragging ourselves from hotel lobby to hotel lobby to keep warm enough to move, occasionally catching a bus to get us closer. The wheels gave out on one of the suitcases and we were forced to abandon it. Finally, they made it across the bridge and to the Canadian border, where Abby fully expected to sign political asylum documents and be let into the country. She later wrote, obviously, you can't just walk into Canada, say, government spies are after me, and just get handed an apartment. I don't know why I ever expected differently, but by this point I was pretty much a non-thinking entity. We told our story, as Jordan had coached me, and the Border Patrol agents laughed in our faces. But before I could even process that, Jordan completely lost his shit. He started screaming and tearing at his hair, shrieking like the crazy person he really is. Because of the extreme weather, they were allowed to sleep on the floor of the Border Patrol office. Jordan was ready to talk about new big plans, businesses to start, all this shit. But really, this was a complete dead end for them. For Abby, it was her rock bottom. She says that she thought about walking outside and letting herself freeze to death, but the thing that stopped her was her pet sparrow. The next morning, Abby called her mom, who she hadn't spoken to in years. She was terrified and embarrassed given the way that she had cut her mom out of her life on Jordan's orders. But she had underestimated her mom. Because you see, her mom had actually spent years keeping up with Abby and Jordan online. She had even flown down to Hollywood and watched them to make sure that her daughter was okay. She had done extensive research on cults and shared psychosis. She had worked with therapists. She was just waiting for Abby to call one day. Mom made me an offer. She would help me get set up in an apartment in Virginia with Jordan if I would come home with her for 1 month and go to a therapist with her. This seemed entirely reasonable to me, although Jordan sulked terribly. He would be staying with his parents for the month, and he wasn't grateful at all. Abby returned to her childhood home, and immediately her anxieties began to lift. Her mother had found her a therapist who specialized in cult deprogramming, and she started going to appointments 2 to 3 times a week. She says that at first, she did lie to her therapist a lot, but I assume cult deprogramming therapists expect that and know how to work with that, because she quickly began making progress. She found herself reconnecting with friends. She went on a trip with her mom to New York, and she had fun. She had fun for the first time in a while. Meanwhile, Jordan made it clear that he was totally miserable and did his best to make me miserable too during his nightly phone calls. We were only allowed to talk once a day for no more than an hour under the banner of long-distance charges. We also wrote letters. Every day or two, I'd get a fat package of missives and cards from multiple others. There were multiple attacks in those letters, some filled with rage, others with longing, others still with hope and excitement for the future. Once Jordan found out about Abby's trip to New York, he became determined to ruin it for her. He took quite drastic action. He made the post, the long confession post that is now known in fanfiction drama circles as the Faux-pology. He confesses to it all, to having been Amy Player, Victoria Bitter, Jordan Wood, and now a new man. Although, interestingly, he does not give out his current name. He's told a few lies in the past, sure, but he's changed. He's a changed man. A Christian, even. He says, for the record, I have in fact moved on with my life and have spent the last several years trying to make amends of it. I have gotten a lot of therapy, and what I am writing here is the product of a huge amount of self-exploration and difficult self-confrontation, as well as professional help and guidance. I have reconnected with my family, moved away from Hollywood, have and intend to have in the future no contact with any fandom of any kind, rediscovered God, changed my name, come to terms with myself as a transgender man, and am now seeking both gender reassignment surgery, normal employment, and a normal healthy life. As previously stated, this confession / setting things straight is part of it. He recounts his history in fandom, his discovery of fandom, back when he was a very intelligent teenager, just too intelligent to relate to any of his peers. He found himself in the arms of fanfiction, had a gender sexuality awakening through emotional hobbit sex. He claims that all of the supernatural beliefs he tried to feed people over the years were his genuine beliefs at the time, but now he sees the error in his ways, that he was in fact direly mentally ill. I since understand that what I was really doing was an uncontrolled mix of free association and role-playing, but at the time, I thought it was very real. This absolutely obliterates the possibility that he ever believed any of this stuff or that he was suffering from mental illness. Because he confessed this. He stone cold said this while still very much in the thick of it with Abby, sending her letters from all of the different others. It seems very unlikely to me that someone with beliefs so extreme and in a mental state so chaotic would ever, even for strategic reasons, be able to sit down and coldly report that they had moved on from all of these childish things years ago and they were a good, upstanding Christian adult now. No. I do not buy that sweaty. Obviously, there has been a ton of debate about Andy's own mental health over the years. For me personally, I think the evidence is strongly against him being a person with dissociative identity disorder or schizophrenia or any of those things that people have liked to diagnose him with through their computer screens over the years. I think that his channeling and his visions were fully just a manipulation tactic. In his faux apology, he also attempted to justify his actions at Bit of Earth. I hung a crazed amount of importance on Bit of Earth, the people in it, and them all continuing to like me at all costs, especially Orange Blossom, Abby, whom I had fallen in love with by then. In order to try and maintain this, I took on ridiculously more than I could handle. If someone wanted it, I promised it. I considered the success of Orange Blossoms and everyone else's whims at Bit of Earth to be the stuff of life or death, and had completely lost all perspective. And if you're fighting for your life, not a convention or organization, you'll do anything, say anything, promise anything, and prop yourself up on a house of cards, hoping you can find the glue before the wind blows. Well, as everyone knows, the wind blew big time, and I didn't have any glue. Seeing the destruction of Tentmoot and the exposure of the lies I had told to try and pull it off, I tried to kill myself, and I am actually very thankful for this, as the mandatory rest in the mental hospital was my first step towards reconnecting with reality. Clearly, he says a lot of fucking things in this faux apology of his. He's got answers for all manner of things that he's accused of, but I'm not gonna bother reading much of it because I think we can all see that it's total shit. He begs the fandom to leave his shady past in the past, and to let him move on, and to start his new, beautiful, happy, and healthy life with Abby, whom he loves so much. I have stopped running. I have confessed my sins, which is to say he has attempted to justify his actions and begged for sympathy. I await the consequences. I deserve no forgiveness. I only ask to be allowed a second chance at life, not at your lives. God bless you. Sincerely. Just me. Ugh. I'm gonna I need to brush my teeth after saying those words. Abby believes that he posted all of this with the intention of riling up Janine and the rest of fandom. And he did that because he knew that online gossip was extremely stress-inducing to Abby, and he wanted to punish her for gaining some independence from him. And she knew it. She saw that he posted this, and she knew exactly why. And for the first time, she realized she didn't deserve this shit. She still believed in Jordan's mythology, she still loved him and missed him, but she was realizing that the most stressful thing in her life, the worst thing in her life, was him, that she dreaded his letters and phone calls. Her month at home eventually passed, and it was time for her to return to Virginia to be with Jordan. Don't worry, it was all part of her mother's plan, which Abby has since dubbed Operation Catch and Release. Upon her return, she realized that she was not happy to see Jordan, that she was disgusted by him and his lies. I felt very ill at ease, and everything seemed so overdramatic and unnecessarily complex. I didn't want to spend half of the night talking to the others. I didn't want to frantically patch things up, or go for long walks, or get nagged to find a job. I was tired of all of it, and I hated the way Jordan treated my mother, who had been nothing but patient and kind with him. For the first time, I had been willing to see Jordan as he was, and having the blinders off, I couldn't pretend he was an outright bald-faced lying to people. I couldn't even care right then if I believed or didn't believe in the mind hole anymore. I just knew I couldn't spend one more day in his presence. I remember all of our parents moving as one, his to stand on either side of him as my mother gently took my arm. I needed her to help me walk away. I could not turn from his pleading eyes. She guided me to the car as Jordan began to scream, that same hideous, chilling, keening wail that terrorized all of us within the cult. Now no longer the howl of some supernatural anguish, but that of a thwarted, monstrous child. After the breakup, Abby moved back in with her mother. Jordan continued to send her piles of manipulative letters for the next year. She's posted a picture of just like a pile of them. Also this one specifically where he enclosed a white feather, which according to a Wikipedia page that she links is some obscure World War II reference where he's basically calling her a coward for not fighting the psychic war with him. In February of 2008, they spoke for the final time. Abby posted to her live journal immediately after saying, "It was not a pleasant conversation. There was a lot of attempts at getting me to say there was a chance to stay friends, begged. He really wound up forcing me to say outright that he's insane, he hurt me terribly, and that I don't ever want to see him again, and I've decided not to write the book. Not for him, mind, but for me. I don't need to be another Janine." It wasn't until 2011 that Abby felt she was recovered enough to really talk about her experiences in depth. After she came out about it, she and Janine slowly made it onto speaking terms. I do not think that they are friends. I do not think that Abby ever fully forgave Janine for the joy she took in torturing her post-tent moot. However, the Bag Enders, Abby, Bob, Diamond, Little Sam, all fully reconciled and were able to talk about their experiences, compare notes on their experiences with Andy together. They also reconciled with Janine, like, enough that they could all have kind of productive conversations about this, and I owe all of the research that I've been able to do for this video to them, their hard work and their bravery in telling their stories. The one thing we are all still left wondering at the end of this, though, is why, right? As I've said, this is such a weird scam. Abby is undoubtedly the person who knows Andy's psyche the best, and in her opinion, his goal is complete control over the people in his life, to have their full attention at any time that he wants, to have their lives devoted to him by any means necessary. Money is just incidental to that. Ditto for meeting movie stars. He wasn't interested in famous people beyond using real or faked connections to celebrities to gain power over people. Living in hotels and working on Hollywood Boulevard was a great thing for him, because he had that level of power over me, and others when they were there. He dictated when I woke, when I slept, how long I worked, how much money we had. If he wanted attention, we quit working, even if that meant we didn't eat. Sue said in an interview once, "At one point Jordan said to me that it meant more than anything in the world to Abby to meet these movie stars, and that Jordan was going to make it happen." The conviction in his voice was real. So, like, he did it for Abby, to control Abby, to have this weird ownership over her? Maybe not, though. Maybe he just did it for the thrill. He just likes to live his life that way. Who the hell knows why he did it? The only thing I do know for sure is that he did it again. He did it again after this. I feel relief at having finally finished this massive, ridiculous, fucking bonkers video about Andy fanfiction, and then I feel not relief knowing there is another one looming on the horizon. Thank you so much for watching this video. You are truly a hero if you got to the end of it with me. I will see you in another one very soon, my friends.